Today, I've prepared the biography of Elvis Presley. Before you fall asleep, make sure to tell us from where you're listening and what time it is. Now, calm down and listen to the story while falling asleep. I'm wishing you a cozy and comfortable night. Welcome to our gentle journey through the life of the King of Rock and Roll. As you settle deeper into your pillow, let the soft rhythm of these words carry you away. Tonight, we'll drift through the tender story of a boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, who changed music forever. Elvis's melodic voice has soothed millions, and now his life story will guide you toward peaceful slumber. The lights are low, your breathing is steady, and we have all night to wander through memories of blue suede shoes and heartbreak hotels. Close your eyes now, dear listener, as we begin our whispered tale of Elvis Presley in the gentle hills of Mississippi, where the summer air hangs warm and heavy like a soft blanket. A child was born who would one day change the landscape of American music forever. On a quiet winter morning, January 8, 1935, in the small town of Tupelo, Gladys Love Presley cradled her newborn son, Elvis Aaron Presley, in her arms. The world outside was moving slowly through the Great Depression, families finding comfort in simple pleasures and the bonds that held them together during difficult times. Elvis came into the world alongside a twin brother, Jesse Garin, who sadly was stillborn, leaving Elvis to grow up as an only child. This early loss created a special bond between young Elvis and his parents, particularly his mother Gladys, who showered him with attention and affection that wrapped around him like a protective embrace. Throughout his childhood years, the Presley family lived modestly in a 2-room shotgun house built by Elvis's father, Vernon, with help from his brother Vester and father, Jesse. Before Elvis was born, the house sat nestled among similar homes in East Tupelo, a neighborhood where everyone knew one another, where screen doors would gently close in the evening as neighbors called out soft goodnights across small, neat yards. Vernon and Gladys Presley came from humble beginnings themselves. Vernon, born in 1916 in Fulton, Mississippi, was a kind-hearted man who worked various jobs to support his family. He had a gentle demeanor and passed down to Elvis his height and dark hair. Gladys, born in 1912, came from a lineage that included Cherokee ancestry. She had a warm spirit and a voice that could fill their small home with comfort when she sang old gospel songs while going about her daily chores. Life in Tupelo during those Depression years was simple but challenging. The Presley family, like many others, struggled financially. Vernon moved between jobs as a painter, farmer, and factory worker, while Gladys worked as a sewing machine operator. Despite their financial struggles, they created a home filled with love and music, which flowed through their lives like a gentle stream, always present, always soothing. Young Elvis was a quiet, polite child who was deeply attached to his parents. He would often sit close to his mother as she hummed softly while preparing meals or mending clothes by the window, where afternoon light would filter through, casting warm patterns on the wooden floor. These quiet moments planted the seeds of musical appreciation in the boy who would one day be known for his remarkable voice. The community of East Tupelo was tightly knit, with the Assembly of God Church serving as its heart. It was here, in the embrace of swaying congregants and uplifting gospel music, that Elvis first experienced the transformative power of music. The church services were filled with energetic singing, hand clapping, and foot stomping expressions of faith that made a deep impression on the young boy. He would watch wide-eyed as people were moved to tears or joyful exclamations by the simple combination of words and melody. His musical tastes were remarkably diverse for a young man of his time and place. B. King. After graduating from Hum's High School in 1953, Elvis worked full-time to help support his family. He drove a truck for Crown Electric, delivering supplies to construction sites throughout Memphis. The sight of the young man with the distinctive hair and quiet demeanor became familiar on the streets of the city as he navigated his truck through neighborhoods both affluent and modest. But the dream of music never left him. In the summer of 1953, Elvis walked into the offices of Sun Records, a small recording studio run by Sam Phillips. The receptionist, Marion Kasker, was struck by his appearance and his voice, making a note to herself about the young man with the unique sound. This first recording was a private moment, a gift from a son to his mother, but it was also the first step on a path that would lead Elvis Presley to become one of the most significant cultural icons of the 20th century. Yet on that summer day, as he carried the precious disc home to play for Gladys, he was simply a son who wanted to bring joy to the woman who had always believed in him. The bond between Elvis and his mother remained extraordinarily strong throughout these formative years. Gladys's love was a constant in his life, a foundation upon which he built his confidence and his dreams. She encouraged his musical interests, celebrated his small successes, and comforted him through disappointments. Their relationship was marked by a deep mutual devotion that sometimes puzzled outsiders, but was the cornerstone of Elvis's emotional life. Vernon, too, supported his son's aspirations, though perhaps with more practical concerns about how music could become a sustainable career. He had known the uncertainty of irregular employment and wanted security for his only child, yet he never discouraged Elvis's passion, recognizing the joy it brought to him. The Memphis of Elvis's teenage years was a city divided by racial segregation. Yet music often crossed these artificial boundaries. Elvis frequented gospel concerts, both white and black, drawn by the emotional power and vocal techniques of the performers. He was a regular attendee at the monthly all-night gospel singing events at the Ellis Auditorium, where he could watch his favorite gospel quartets perform until dawn. These musical influences gradually blended in Elvis's mind and heart, creating a foundation for the distinctive sound he would later develop. He wasn't consciously trying to create something new. He was simply expressing his love for all the music that had touched him throughout his young life. As the early 1950s unfolded, Elvis continued to work and dream. He remained close to his parents, still living at home and contributing his earnings to the family's needs. His appearance became more distinctive. The longer hair styled with lavish amounts of oil, the more colorful clothing choices, the quiet confidence that was beginning to emerge. Some people in conservative Memphis raised eyebrows at his appearance, but Elvis remained respectfully determined to be himself. In 1954, Elvis returned to Sun Records, drawn back by an inner calling that wouldn't be silenced. Sam Phillips, who had once remarked that he could make a fortune if he could find a white boy who could sing with the emotional intensity of African American performers, gave Elvis a chance to record. After some initial attempts that didn't quite capture what Phillips was looking for, something magical happened during a break when Elvis began to play and sing "That's All Right," a blues song by Arthur Crudup, in his own unique style. Bassist Bill Black and guitarist Scotty Moore joined in, and the resulting recording captured a fresh sound. Not quite country, not quite blues, but something new and compelling. When Phillips heard it, he knew he had found something special. "That's All Right" was released as a single in July 1954, marking the official beginning of Elvis Presley's recording career. The years of listening, absorbing, practicing, and dreaming had led to this moment. The shy boy from Tupelo, who had once stood on a chair to reach a microphone at a county fair, was taking his first steps toward becoming the artist who would be known as the king of rock and roll. But on warm Memphis evenings, he still returned to the modest home he shared with Vernon and Gladys. Still, the devoted son whose greatest joy was bringing happiness to the parents who had always believed in him. As we drift with these gentle memories of Elvis's early years, we can almost feel the warm Mississippi breeze, hear the soft strumming of a guitar on a front porch, and sense the love that surrounded a boy whose voice would one day echo around the world. From humble beginnings in a two-room house to the quiet determination of a young man finding his way, Elvis Presley's early life reminds us that extraordinary journeys often begin in the most ordinary of places, nurtured by love, shaped by community, and guided by dreams that whisper to us in the stillness of our hearts. Let us drift further into the story as we explore the next part of this fascinating journey. In the soft glow of evening light that falls across the rolling hills of Mississippi, we find the roots of a family tree that would one day bear extraordinary fruit. The story of Elvis Presley begins not with bright lights or screaming fans, but with quiet moments among humble people with whispered stories told on front porches, and with the gentle mingling of cultural streams that would one day converge in the soul of a boy from Tupelo. The Presley lineage stretches back through the mists of time to the green valleys of Scotland and the rugged terrain of Germany. On his father's side, Elvis Aaron Presley descended from Scottish and German ancestors who made their way to America seeking new horizons and fresh beginnings. The name Presley, or Presley as it was sometimes spelled, carried echoes of the old country, of highlands and heather, of folk songs sung around peat fires on cold northern nights. Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, was born on April 10, 1916, in Fulton, Mississippi, to Jessie D. McClowell Presley and Minnie "Me" Hood Presley. Vernon grew up knowing the rhythms of rural life, the cadence of hard work, and the comfort of close family bonds. The Presleys were people of the land, their hands familiar with soil and labor, their hearts attuned to the simple pleasures of country living. They carried with them traditions of storytelling and music making that had traveled across oceans and generations. Minnie "Me" Hood Presley, whom Elvis would later affectionately call Grandma Dodger, was a steady presence in the family, a keeper of stories and traditions. Born in 1890, she lived through tremendous changes in American life, from horse-drawn carriages to automobiles, from oil lamps to electric lights. Her resilience and adaptability would later be reflected in her famous grandson, who would himself bridge worlds old and new. On Elvis's maternal side flowed equally rich currents of heritage and history. His mother, Gladys Love Smith, was born on April 25, 1912, in Pontotoc County, Mississippi. The Smith family claimed ancestry that included Cherokee Native American heritage, though the exact lineage remains somewhat misty in the family records. This possible indigenous connection was something Elvis would later feel drawn to, perhaps sensing in it an explanation for his dark features and deep spiritual sensibilities. Gladys's family knew hardship intimately. Her father, Robert Lee Smith, was a sharecropper who moved his family from place to place in search of better opportunities. Her mother, Octavia Luvinia Mansell, kept the family together through difficult times, teaching her children the value of love and loyalty above material wealth. These lessons would become the cornerstone of Gladys's own approach to motherhood, creating a foundation of unconditional love that would shape Elvis's sense of self. The gentle interweaving of these family lines, Scottish, German, and possibly Cherokee, created a rich tapestry of cultural influences that would later be expressed in Elvis's music and sensibilities. In the small communities of northeastern Mississippi, these diverse heritages blended with the broader Southern culture, creating something uniquely American, uniquely Southern, and ultimately, uniquely Elvis. Vernon and Gladys met as teenagers in the early 1930s. Vernon, tall and handsome at 6 feet, caught the eye of Gladys, who was known for her vivacity and warmth. Their courtship unfolded against the backdrop of the Great Depression, a time when simple pleasures took on greater significance, and when the promise of companionship offered a bulwark against uncertain times. They married on June 17, 1933, in Pontotoc County, Mississippi. Vernon was just 17, and Gladys was 21. The young couple began their life together in the embrace of extended family, living for a time with Vernon's parents. They shared the dreams common to young couples of their era, hopes for a home of their own, for children to love, for work that would sustain them. These modest aspirations were the soil in which their family story would take root. The early years of their marriage were marked by the continued hardships of the Depression. Vernon worked various jobs, including as a sharecropper and later in a dairy, while Gladys contributed to the household through her own labor. They moved several times, following opportunities for work, always within the familiar landscape of northeastern Mississippi, where family connections provided a safety net in difficult times. In 1934, the couple settled in East Tupelo, where Vernon, with the help of his father and brother, built a small 2-room house on Old Saltillo Road. This modest dwelling, painted a soft blue, would become the birthplace of their children. The house cost approximately $180, a significant sum for the young couple, and represented their investment in a future together. The Presleys were expecting twins, a fact that brought both joy and concern given their limited resources. On January 8, 1935, Gladys gave birth to 2 boys. The first, Jesse Garin Presley, was stillborn, delivered about 35 minutes before his brother. The second twin, Elvis Aaron Presley, entered the world healthy and strong. The loss of Jesse cast a shadow over what should have been a purely joyful occasion, and created what many would later see as a defining aspect of Elvis's psychological makeup, a sense of being both blessed and burdened by survival. Gladys and Vernon mourned the loss of Jesse Garin, who was buried in an unmarked grave in Priceville Cemetery. The experience deepened their attachment to Elvis, who became the focus of their hopes and dreams. Gladys, in particular, developed an intensely close bond with her surviving son, a relationship characterized by mutual devotion that would endure throughout her life. The small blue house in East Tupelo became the cocoon in which young Elvis was nurtured and protected. Though the family had little in material terms, their home was rich in affection. In the evenings, after Vernon returned from work, the family might sit on the porch, listening to the chorus of cicadas and sharing stories of the day. These quiet moments of connection formed Elvis's earliest memories, creating in him a deep appreciation for the simple pleasures of family life. The Presley household reflected the cultural traditions of their Scots-Irish and German ancestors, blended with the regional customs of the American South. Food played an important role in family gatherings, with recipes passed down through generations. Gladys was known for her cooking, preparing Southern staples like cornbread, collard greens, and fried chicken. These dishes, made with love and often with ingredients grown in their own small garden, represented both sustenance and celebration. Music was a natural part of daily life for the Presleys and their neighbors. In the evenings, families might gather to sing together, harmonizing on old folk songs, hymns, and ballads that had traveled from the British Isles, Germany, and Africa to find new expression in the American South. Vernon had a pleasant singing voice, and both parents encouraged Elvis's early interest in music. The family attended the First Assembly of God Church in East Tupelo, where Elvis was exposed to the passionate expressions of gospel music. The church services were filled with energetic singing, hand clapping, and sometimes speaking in tongues, expressions of spiritual fervor that made a deep impression on the sensitive boy. The rhythms and emotional intensity of these religious experiences would later influence Elvis's musical style and performance. Family stories were treasured and transmitted orally, keeping alive the connections to ancestors and earlier times. Elvis likely heard tales of his Scottish forebears, of their journey across the Atlantic, of their struggles and triumphs in the new land. From Gladys's family came stories possibly touching on their Cherokee heritage, tales of a people deeply connected to the land and its rhythms. These narratives helped shape Elvis's sense of identity and place in the world. The extended family played an important role in Elvis's early life. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins formed a supportive network around the small nuclear family. Minnie Presley, Vernon's mother, was particularly close to her grandson and would later live with Elvis at Graceland, maintaining that family connection even after he achieved worldwide fame. The Presleys' economic circumstances remained challenging throughout Elvis's childhood. When Elvis was 3 years old, Vernon was sentenced to 8 months in prison for altering a check, a desperate act during desperate times. During Vernon's absence, Gladys and Elvis moved in with relatives, an experience that further strengthened their already close bond and impressed upon Elvis the importance of family loyalty during difficult times. After Vernon's release, the family continued to struggle financially, moving frequently in search of better opportunities. These experiences of poverty and insecurity left their mark on Elvis, instilling in him both a hunger for security and a compassion for others facing similar hardships. Later in life, his legendary generosity, his readiness to give gifts, to help friends, and even strangers in need, can be traced back to these early experiences of want and the relief that came from the kindness of others. Despite these challenges, the Presleys maintained certain family traditions that provided stability and continuity. Holidays were special times, with Christmas bringing modest but meaningful celebrations. Gladys would save throughout the year to provide gifts for Elvis, and the family would enjoy a special meal together. These occasions reinforced family bonds and created memories that Elvis would cherish throughout his life. When Elvis was 13, the family moved to Memphis, Tennessee, seeking better employment opportunities. This move represented a significant transition from the rural environment of Tupelo to the more urban setting of Memphis. The family settled in a succession of rented rooms and apartments in the working-class neighborhoods of the city. In Memphis, Elvis was exposed to a broader range of musical influences. Beale Street, the center of African American culture and music in the city, became a place of fascination for the teenage Elvis, who would slip away to absorb the sounds of blues and rhythm and blues that poured from the clubs and record shops. These musical experiences, combined with his earlier exposure to gospel and country music, were forming in him a unique musical sensibility. Throughout these changes, the core values of the Presley family remained constant: love, loyalty, faith, and resilience. Vernon and Gladys continued to support Elvis's interests and dreams, even when they didn't fully understand them. When Elvis expressed a desire for a guitar instead of the bicycle Vernon had suggested for his 11th birthday, his parents managed to purchase the instrument, setting him on the path that would define his life. The close-knit nature of the Presley family was both a source of strength and, in some ways, a challenge for Elvis as he grew older and his world expanded. The intensity of his relationship with Gladys, in particular, created a standard of unconditional love that he would seek in other relationships throughout his life. As Elvis began to find success in the mid-1950s, his first impulse was to improve his parents' circumstances. He purchased a house for them on Audubon Drive in Memphis, a comfortable home that represented a dramatic improvement over their previous living conditions. This act of filial devotion reflected the values instilled in him through years of family solidarity in the face of hardship. The cultural roots that nourished Elvis throughout his childhood and adolescence, the Scottish and German influences from Vernon's side, the possibly Cherokee heritage from Gladys's family, the Southern traditions that surrounded them, the religious expressions of their church community, all contributed to the unique individual who would emerge on the world stage. His music would draw from all these wells, creating something new that nevertheless carried echoes of ancient traditions. As we drift with these gentle memories of Elvis's family history, we can almost hear the soft voices of his ancestors, singing lullabies in Scottish highlands, in German villages, in Cherokee settlements, in Southern churches. We can imagine the hands that worked the land, that built homes, that held children close, that eventually applauded a young man whose voice would capture the imagination of the world. from humble beginnings in a two-room house to worldwide fame, Elvis Presley carried with him the legacy of generations. The stories told on quiet evenings, the songs sung in moments of joy and sorrow, the values taught through word and example. His journey reminds us that we are all shaped by those who came before us, carrying their dreams, their resilience, their love forward into our own lives, creating new verses to ancient songs, new chapters to timeless stories. And as the stars shine over Tupelo, over Memphis, over all the places where the Presley family story unfolded, we can rest in the knowledge that our own stories, too, are part of something larger, connected to those who came before and those who will follow. A gentle continuity that bridges past and future in the eternal present of dreams. The peaceful narrative of this life continues as we turn our attention to what happened next. In the gentle rolling hills of Mississippi, in a place where time seemed to move with the slow cadence of the seasons, Elvis Aaron Presley entered the world on January 8, 1935. The landscape that welcomed this tiny baby boy was one of modest beauty, where cotton fields stretched toward the horizon and dirt roads meandered between small family homes that dotted the countryside. The town of Tupelo, where Elvis first drew breath, was a small southern community where everyone seemed to know one another, where front porch conversations lasted long into the evening, and where the rhythms of daily life followed patterns established generations before. The house where Elvis was born was a humble dwelling, a small shotgun-style structure built by his father Vernon, with help from his grandfather and uncle. Just imagine this simple two-room house, painted a soft white that glowed gently in the Mississippi sunshine. The wooden floors, worn smooth by footsteps, creaked softly with each movement, telling stories of the family's quiet daily routines. The walls were thin, allowing the sounds of nature to filter through. The melodic chirping of crickets in the evening, the soft patter of rain on the roof during summer storms, the distant calls of whippoorwills as dusk settled over the land. Inside this modest home, the air carried the comforting aromas of southern cooking, perhaps cornbread baking in the oven, beans simmering slowly on the stove, creating a warm atmosphere that enveloped the young Elvis in a sense of security. Despite the family's financial struggles, the kitchen was the heart of this tiny home, where his mother Gladys would hum softly as she prepared simple meals. Her gentle voice, perhaps the first music that touched Elvis's developing senses. The furniture was sparse, but cared for. Perhaps a well-worn sofa where the family would gather, a wooden table where they shared meals, talking softly about the day's events, their hopes, their dreams. A kerosene lamp might have cast a warm, golden glow across the room in the evenings, creating dancing shadows on the walls that might have fascinated young Elvis as he drifted toward sleep. Outside, the yard was simple, a patch of grass where chickens might have wandered freely, perhaps a garden where Gladys grew vegetables to supplement their meals. Tall trees provided welcome shade in the hot Mississippi summers, their leaves rustling gently in the breeze, creating a natural lullaby. One can imagine young Elvis playing in the dappled sunlight beneath these trees. The shifting patterns of light and shadow playing across his face as he explored his small world. The neighborhood around them was equally modest. A community of working-class families, all striving to make ends meet during the challenging years of the Great Depression. The houses were set comfortably apart, with enough space between them for gardens and small livestock, yet close enough that neighbors could call to one another across the yards. Dirt paths connected these homes, dusty in the dry summer months, turning to mud when the rains came, marking the shoes and hems of those who traveled them. The sounds of this neighborhood would have formed the backdrop to Elvis's earliest memories. The distant whistle of trains passing through Tupelo, the occasional automobile rumbling down the main road, the barking of dogs announcing visitors, the laughter of children playing games in the early evening hours. On Sundays, church bells would ring out across the community, calling families to worship, their clear tones floating on the air like a benediction. East Tupelo, where the Presleys lived, was separated from the more affluent Tupelo proper by railroad tracks, a physical division that represented the social and economic boundaries of the time. This was a community where people worked with their hands, men laboring in fields or at whatever jobs they could find, women tending homes and children, everyone contributing to the family's survival. The rhythm of life followed the rising and setting of the sun, with early mornings filled with chores and evenings spent in quiet conversation or listening to the radio, a precious connection to the wider world beyond their small community. The natural world around Tupelo offered its own gentle education to young Elvis in the quiet classrooms of East Tupelo Consolidated School. Young Elvis Presley began his formal education around 1941. A shy boy with watchful eyes and an observant nature, the school itself was a modest building, much like the homes in the neighborhood, with simple wooden desks worn smooth by generations of children before him. Here, Elvis would sit by windows that let in the golden Mississippi sunlight, filtering through in dusty beams that seemed to dance whenever someone walked through them. His first grade teacher, a gentle woman with patient hands and a soft voice, noticed that this quiet boy seemed to absorb everything around him, his eyes following her movements as she wrote letters on the chalkboard. Elvis was not what many would consider a naturally academic child. The structured environment of school presented challenges for a boy whose mind seemed to wander toward melodies rather than mathematics. His teachers would later recall how he would sometimes hum softly to himself while completing his assignments, a barely audible tune that seemed to help him concentrate. When asked to read aloud, his voice was surprisingly clear and expressive, hinting at the performer who would emerge years later. The Presley family's financial struggles meant that Elvis's educational experience was occasionally interrupted. When his father Vernon sought work in different towns, the family would move, requiring Elvis to adjust to new classrooms, new teachers, new faces. These transitions were not easy for the sensitive boy, yet they taught him adaptability, a quality that would serve him well throughout his life. Each new school environment added another layer to his understanding of people, of different ways of speaking and interacting, enriching his emotional intelligence in ways that formal education alone could not provide. In these early school years, Elvis discovered something that would become central to his life: music class. The simple joy of singing with other children, of learning to shape notes and follow rhythms, awakened something profound in him. His music teacher, noticing his natural ear for melody, would sometimes ask him to lead the class in songs. Though initially reluctant due to his shyness, Elvis found that when he sang, a different part of himself emerged, more confident, more connected to something beyond the everyday world of arithmetic and spelling tests. By the time the Presley family moved to Memphis in 1948, Elvis had completed most of elementary school. The transition to Hum's High School represented a significant change in his educational journey. The building itself was larger, more imposing than his previous schools, with long corridors and many more students. Here, Elvis continued to be a relatively average student academically, but his musical education began to deepen in unexpected ways. Memphis in the late 1940s was a city rich with musical influences, gospel pouring from church doors on Sunday mornings, blues echoing from Beale Street at night, country music playing on radios throughout the day. For Elvis, the city itself became a classroom of sorts. He would often wander after school, absorbing these sounds, letting them settle into his consciousness. Sometimes he would stand outside clubs where he was too young to enter, just listening to the musicians inside, feeling the rhythms pulse through the walls. At Hum's High School, Elvis found mentors who recognized something special in him. His music teacher, Mrs. Marmon, encouraged his participation in school musical activities, creating spaces where he could explore his developing voice. Though Elvis remained somewhat of an outsider among his peers, his clothes a little different, his hair a little longer, his manner somewhat reserved, he found acceptance in these musical settings. In his history classes, Elvis showed particular interest in stories of self-made individuals who had risen from humble beginnings. The changing seasons brought distinct sensory experiences. The heavy, humid heat of summer, when cicadas droned from the trees and thunderstorms built dramatic cloud castles in the afternoon sky. The crisp clarity of autumn, when leaves turned gold and crimson before drifting to the ground in lazy spirals. The occasional winter snow, that transformed the familiar landscape into something magical and new. The explosion of color and scent when spring returned, bringing dogwood blossoms and the sweet perfume of magnolias. Water was never far away in this Mississippi landscape. Creeks and small rivers winding through the countryside, places where children might wade on hot summer days, feeling the cool mud squish between their toes, watching minnows dart through the clear shallows. These waterways were the veins of the community, places of recreation, sources of food, and constant reminders of the natural world's quiet presence in their lives. The economic hardship that shaped Elvis's childhood was a shared experience in East Tupelo. Families helped one another through difficult times, sharing what little they had, offering assistance when illness struck, or when extra hands were needed for a project. This communal spirit created a safety net of human kindness, teaching young Elvis about generosity and interdependence long before he could articulate these concepts. When Elvis was 3 years old, this quiet life was disrupted when his father Vernon was imprisoned for altering a check. During this painful separation, Gladys and Elvis were forced to leave their little house, moving in with relatives. One can imagine the confusion this created for the young boy. The sense of displacement, as familiar surroundings were replaced with new ones. The absence of his father's deep voice and strong presence in their daily routine. When Vernon returned after serving his sentence, the family's financial situation was even more precarious, leading them to move frequently in search of better opportunities. These early years of movement from one rented home to another meant that Elvis experienced a variety of living situations. Perhaps a room in a relative's home, a small apartment in town, another modest house similar to his birthplace. Each move brought new neighbors, new surroundings to explore, new trees to climb, new hiding places to discover. While this lack of stability might have been challenging, it also exposed the young boy to different environments and people, broadening his understanding of the world and developing his adaptability. Throughout these changes, certain constants remained in Elvis's life. The sounds of music were ever present. Hymns sung in church on Sunday mornings, the radio playing country tunes and gospel songs, neighbors gathering on porches with guitars and harmonicas in the cool of the evening. Music floated through the air of East Tupelo like pollen, invisible but pervasive, settling into Elvis's consciousness, taking root and beginning to grow. The church played a central role in shaping Elvis's understanding of music and community. The Assembly of God church that the Presleys attended was a place where music wasn't just performed, but experienced physically and emotionally. The congregation swayed together, raised hands in praise, called out responses to the preacher's words. Here, Elvis witnessed the power of music to move people, to connect them to something larger than themselves, to express emotions too deep for ordinary speech. The passionate singing, the rhythmic clapping, the occasional tambourine adding its silver voice to the chorus. All of these elements created a rich auditory tapestry that would influence Elvis's musical sensibilities throughout his life. School introduced another dimension to Elvis's world, the classroom with its rows of desks, the playground with its games and social hierarchies, the walk to and from school through the changing seasons. These experiences connected him to a wider community of children his age. Perhaps he was shy at first, standing at the edge of games, observing before participating. Or perhaps his natural charisma was already evident, drawing other children to him like moths to a gentle flame. The schoolhouse itself would have had its own sensory landscape. The smell of chalk dust and books, the sound of children reciting lessons in unison, the visual rhythm of alphabet charts and number lines decorating the walls. When Elvis was 13, the Presley family made a significant move, leaving Tupelo behind and relocating to Memphis, Tennessee. This transition from a small town to a vibrant city represented a major shift in Elvis's environmental influences. Memphis in the late 1940s was a place of energy and contradiction. A southern city with a beating heart of blues and jazz, where different cultures and musical traditions converged and cross-pollinated. The Presleys found housing in a public housing development known as Lauderdale Courts, a step up from some of their previous accommodations, but still firmly within the working class experience. These apartment buildings, with their brick exteriors and simple architecture, created a more densely populated living environment than Elvis had known before. Neighbors lived in close proximity, their lives overlapping in hallways, shared courtyards, and community spaces. The sounds of the city would have been more pronounced here. Traffic on nearby streets, music drifting from open windows, the conversations of people passing by, all creating a constant urban symphony that contrasted with the quieter rhythms of Tupelo. The apartment itself, while modest, offered more space than some of their previous homes. One can imagine the layout. Perhaps a small living room where the family's few pieces of furniture were arranged with care. A kitchen where Gladys continued to create meals that maintained their connection to their southern roots. Bedrooms that offered private spaces for reflection and rest. The windows of this apartment would have framed a different view than those in Tupelo. Other buildings, rather than open countryside. Streets busy with people and vehicles, rather than quiet lanes and distant fields. Memphis offered Elvis a rich tapestry of sensory experiences that expanded his understanding of the world. Beale Street, the legendary thoroughfare known for its blues clubs and vibrant African-American culture, would have been a revelation to the teenage Elvis, even if he couldn't enter the clubs themselves at his young age. Just walking down Beale Street would have immersed him in a world of sounds, sights, and energy, unlike anything in Tupelo. The music pouring from doorways, the colorfully dressed people, the aromas of restaurants and street vendors. All of these elements created an intoxicating environment that spoke to possibilities beyond the constraints of his family's economic situation. The Mississippi River, flowing majestically alongside Memphis, would have added another dimension to Elvis's expanding world. This mighty waterway, with its slow, powerful current, its cargo ships and riverboats, its connection to distant places, both upstream and down, might have stirred the imagination of a boy whose horizons were steadily widening, standing on its banks, watching the play of light on water, feeling the slightly cooler air that often moves across large bodies of water. Elvis might have contemplated his own journey, sensing perhaps that his life, like the river, was moving toward something significant, but as yet unknown. Hum's High School, where Elvis attended as a teenager, introduced him to a more diverse social environment than he had known in Tupelo. Here, he encountered students from various backgrounds, with different accents, customs, and musical tastes. The school building itself, larger and more institutional than his previous schools, represented a more structured world with its bell schedules, changing classes, and expanded curriculum. Walking these hallways, sitting at these desks, raising his hand in these classrooms, Elvis was being shaped by new influences, new expectations, new possibilities. Throughout these years of transition and growth, the constants in Elvis's life remained his family relationships and music. The close bond between Elvis and his mother Gladys provided emotional stability amid the changes in their external environment. Their relationship, characterized by mutual devotion and understanding, created a secure emotional foundation that allowed Elvis to explore his expanding world with confidence. Vernon, though sometimes struggling to provide financially for his family, contributed his own steady presence and work ethic to the family dynamic. Music continued to be the current that ran through Elvis's life, connecting his past in Tupelo with his present in Memphis. The radio brought an ever-widening range of musical styles into their home: country, gospel, blues, and early rhythm and blues. Elvis absorbed these diverse influences, his musical sensibilities developing and deepening as he was exposed to new sounds and performance styles. Perhaps in the privacy of his room, he began to experiment with his own voice, discovering its range and power, finding that singing offered a form of self-expression that felt natural and right. The physical environments of Elvis's childhood, from the simple two-room house in Tupelo to the apartment in Memphis, were modest by any standard. Yet, within these humble spaces, a unique sensibility was being formed, one that would eventually enable Elvis to connect with millions of people through his music. The limitations of these environments may have actually contributed to his development, teaching him to find richness in simple pleasures, to value human connections above material possessions, to use imagination as a way to transcend physical boundaries. as we imagine young Elvis moving through these spaces, the dusty yards of Tupelo, the bustling streets of Memphis, the quiet interiors of family homes, the communal energy of church services. We can see how each environment left its imprint on his developing sense of self. The physical and social landscapes of his childhood became part of his internal landscape, influencing how he moved, how he spoke, how he sang, how he connected with others. These early environments, with all their limitations and possibilities, helped shape the man who would eventually step into Sun Records studio in 1953, carrying with him the accumulated influences of all the places he had been and all the people he had known. And as we drift with these gentle memories of Elvis's formative years, we can almost hear the soft voices of his neighbors singing on their porches in the evening, the hymns rising from the Assembly of God Church on Sunday mornings, the blues notes floating from Beale Street clubs, all blending together in the developing musical consciousness of a boy who would one day be known as the king of rock and roll. We can imagine the hands that built his first home, that planted gardens to feed the family, that eventually applauded a young man whose voice would capture the imagination of the world. In these quiet reflections on Elvis's beginnings, we find the soothing reminder that even the most extraordinary journeys start in ordinary places, unfolding one day at a time, shaped by the gentle, persistent influences of home and community. As you relax deeper, let us now softly explore the next chapter of this soothing biography. Elvis's first live performances were humble affairs, small clubs, high school gyms, local radio shows. He was nervous at first, unsure of how to move on stage, but the music carried him. His hips swayed almost unconsciously, his legs shaking with the rhythm. And soon, the girls in the audience began screaming. No one had seen anything like it. A young man who sang with the soul of a blues artist, but looked like the boy next door. The energy between Elvis, Scotty, and Bill was undeniable. And before long, they were touring across the South, playing wherever they could find an audience. Yet the road was not always smooth. Some venues canceled their shows when they realized how electrifying and controversial Elvis's performances were. Older audiences scowled at his suggestive movements. Preachers condemned him from pulpits, but the teenagers adored him, flocking to his shows in droves, screaming so loudly that the music was sometimes drowned out. Elvis himself was often bewildered by the frenzy, once whispering to a bandmate mid-performance, "What am I doing?" In 1955, Elvis signed with RCA Records, a move that would catapult him to national fame. His first single for the label, Heartbreak Hotel, was darker, moodier than his Sun recordings, but it resonated deeply with listeners. It climbed the charts, and suddenly, Elvis was no longer just a regional sensation. He was a phenomenon. Television appearances followed, each one more explosive than the last. On the Milton Berle Show, His playful hip movements sent shockwaves through conservative America. By the time he appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, the country was divided, parents horrified, teenagers enthralled. Behind the scenes, Elvis remained soft-spoken, polite, almost shy. He called people sir and ma'am, still very much the boy from Tupelo who had been raised to respect his elders. The contrast between his on-stage wildness and his off-stage gentleness only added to his mystique. He soaked up advice from those around him, Colonel Tom Parker, his shrewd manager, the seasoned musicians who played on his records, even rival performers who recognized his talent. By 1956, Elvis was unstoppable. Hits like Hound Dog, Don't Be Cruel, and Love Me Tender dominated the airwaves. He starred in his first film, Love Me Tender, though acting was still new territory for him. The world wanted more music, more movies, more of that undeniable charisma, and through it all, Elvis kept learning, kept evolving, never forgetting the voices that had shaped him. As we drift deeper into sleep, we can almost hear those early recordings, the slapback echo of Sun's studio, the twang of Scotty's guitar, the warmth of Elvis's voice, still young but already timeless. It was the beginning of something vast, something that would change music forever. And in the quiet of the night, those first notes still linger, soft as a whisper, inviting us to dream of a time when rock and roll was just being born, and a boy from Memphis was learning how to make the world move with him, drifting like clouds across the evening sky. We now move to the next part of this calming life story. The year 1956 was just the beginning, a spark that would grow into a blazing fire. Elvis Presley, still so young, still so full of restless energy, was about to reshape the landscape of music in ways no one could have imagined. His voice, rich and velvety, could slip effortlessly from a tender croon to a raw, guttural growl. And it was this versatility that made him unlike anyone else. He didn't just sing songs, he lived them, letting the music move through him, his body swaying, his hips shaking in a way that sent shockwaves through a generation. One of his defining moments came with Hound Dog, a song originally recorded by Big Mama Thornton, but utterly transformed by Elvis's electrifying delivery. The king may be gone, but his music lingers, a gentle lullaby in the dark, reminding us of a time when a boy from Tupelo taught the world how to dream. As your breathing becomes more regular, let us continue with the next chapter of our biography. Elvis Presley's life was a series of crossroads, moments where a single decision could have changed everything: his path, his legacy, even the way the world remembered him. One of the first and most pivotal of these moments came when he was just a teenager, standing nervously in the doorway of Sun's studio in Memphis. He had come to record a song for his mother's birthday, paying a few dollars for the chance to hear his own voice on a record. But something unexpected happened that day. Sam Phillips, the owner of the studio, heard something in Elvis' voice a rawness, a passion, a blend of gospel, blues, and country that no one had ever quite put together before. Phillips invited him back, and soon Elvis found himself in the studio with guitarist Scotty Moore and bassist Bill Black, fumbling through songs, searching for a sound. Then came the moment that changed everything. He played it faster, looser, with a rhythm that made it impossible to sit still. Scotty and Bill joined in, and suddenly the room was alive with something new. Sam Phillips rushed in, asking what they were doing. "We don't know," Elvis admitted with a laugh. But Phillips knew. He had found the sound he'd been searching for, a white kid singing black music with a country twist, something that could bridge the divide in a segregated America. That recording became Elvis' first single, and within weeks, it was playing on radios across the South. Had Elvis chosen differently? Had he been too shy to return to Sun's studio? Or too hesitant to let loose with that song? His life might have stayed small. A quiet existence in Memphis, working odd jobs, and singing in church on Sundays. But in that moment, he took a leap, trusting the music inside him, and the world would never be the same. Another turning point came in 1955, when Colonel Tom Parker entered the picture. Parker was a shrewd promoter, a man who saw dollar signs in Elvis' raw talent. He convinced Elvis' parents that their son needed professional management, and soon he was negotiating a deal with RCA Records, buying out Elvis' contract from Sun for an unheard of sum. It was a risky move. Sam Phillips had been the one to believe in Elvis first, but RCA had the money and the reach to take him national. Some of Elvis' early supporters worried he was being taken advantage of, that Parker cared more about profit than art, and yet the move paid off. RCA's resources allowed Elvis to record with better musicians, to reach bigger audiences, to become a star in ways Sun never could have provided. But there was a cost. Parker's control over Elvis' career would only tighten with time, steering him toward movies and merchandise, away from the raw energy of his early music. One can't help but wonder, what if Elvis had stayed with Sun, growing slowly, refining his sound without the pressure of instant stardom? Would he have burned less brightly, but longer, avoiding the exhaustion that came with relentless touring and Hollywood demands? Or would he have faded into obscurity, just another regional act with a handful of recordings? The path he chose made him a legend, but legends often pay a price. Then there was the Army. In 1958, at the height of his fame, Elvis was drafted. Some stars might have pulled strings to avoid service, but Elvis chose to go, believing it was his duty. For 2 years, he traded sequined jumpsuits for Army fatigues, performing no concerts, making no records. It was a gamble. Would his fans forget him? Would the music scene move on without him? But Elvis used the time to grow. Stationed in Germany, he soaked up new influences, from European ballads to the deeper blues he heard in the club's off bass. These narratives resonated with him, planting seeds of possibility in his imagination. Though he might not have excelled at memorizing dates or formulas, he absorbed these lessons about perseverance and transformation, incorporating them into his evolving sense of self and possibility. Elvis's English teachers noted his appreciation for certain poems and stories, particularly those with rhythmic language or emotional depth. He responded to the musicality of language, to the way words could evoke feelings and paint pictures. One teacher recalled lending him a volume of Tennyson's poems, surprised when he returned it with thoughtful comments about the sound and flow of the verses. This sensitivity to language would later manifest in his unique interpretation of lyrics, in his ability to find the emotional core of a song and communicate it directly to listeners outside the formal classroom. Elvis's education continued in the rich cultural environment of Memphis. The city's libraries became sanctuaries for him, places where he could explore books about musicians and performers he admired. He would spend hours looking through album covers in record stores, studying the images and notes, absorbing information about musical styles and performance techniques. These self-directed explorations were perhaps as important to his development as any formal lessons. Religious education also played a significant role in Elvis's intellectual and artistic formation. The Assemblies of God Church that the Presleys attended offered not just spiritual guidance, but a musical education of profound importance. Here, Elvis experienced the emotional power of gospel music, the way it could lift a congregation from ordinary concerns into a space of collective joy and transcendence. The church choir director, recognizing Elvis's natural talent, took time to teach him about vocal harmonies and performance, lessons that would influence his musical approach throughout his career. As Elvis moved through his high school years, his academic performance remained modest. He was not the student whose hand shot up first with answers, nor the one whose essays were read aloud as examples. Yet he was absorbing other kinds of knowledge, emotional, cultural, musical, that would prove invaluable. His teachers would later remember him as respectful, attentive in his own way, someone who seemed to be listening for something beyond the immediate lesson. In his junior year, a music assignment required students to perform for the class. Elvis, still shy but increasingly drawn to performance, brought his guitar to school. The response from his classmates to his rendition of a popular country song marked a turning point. For perhaps the first time in his educational experience, Elvis found himself at the center of positive attention, his unique style and voice acknowledged and appreciated. This moment of recognition within the school setting affirmed something he had begun to sense, that music offered him a path forward, a way to express himself that transcended the limitations he felt in other areas. By his senior year at Hums High, Elvis had begun to develop his distinctive appearance. The longer hair styled with rose oil, the more colorful clothing that set him apart from other boys. This external expression reflected an internal development, a growing confidence in his unique perspective and talents. While some teachers might have discouraged such individuality, Elvis was fortunate to encounter educators who, while maintaining expectations for classroom behavior, allowed him space to develop his personal style. Elvis graduated from Hum's High School in 1953. His academic record unremarkable, but his educational experience far richer than grades could reflect. The diploma he received that day represented not just the completion of required courses, but the culmination of a more complex learning journey, one that had taken place in classrooms and churches, on street corners, and in music stores. Through formal instruction and self-directed exploration. After graduation, Elvis's education continued in less conventional settings. His job at Crown Electric Company exposed him to different neighborhoods throughout Memphis, different people and situations, further broadening his understanding of the city and its inhabitants. In the evenings, he would sometimes attend music shows, studying the performers with the same intensity he had once applied to his school books, noticing how they moved, how they connected with audiences, how they structured their sets for maximum impact. Perhaps the most significant educational experience of this post-high school period came when Elvis first entered Sun Record Studio. Here, under the guidance of Sam Phillips, Elvis received a different kind of schooling, one focused on artistic development, on finding and refining his unique sound. Phillips, recognizing something special in the young man, became a kind of teacher, providing feedback, encouraging experimentation, helping Elvis to discover his own musical voice. These sessions in the small, unassuming studio on Union Avenue constituted a graduate course in musical expression, one that would transform not just Elvis's life, but the landscape of American popular music. Throughout his rapid rise to fame in the mid-1950s, Elvis continued to learn, to absorb influences, to develop his artistic sensibility. His natural curiosity led him to explore different musical traditions, to listen to performers across genres, to incorporate diverse elements into his evolving style. Though he never attended college in the traditional sense, Elvis's intellectual and artistic development continued throughout his life, shaped by experiences, relationships, successes, and challenges. The education of Elvis Presley reminds us that learning takes many forms, that intelligence manifests in diverse ways, that the most profound education often happens in the spaces between formal instruction, in moments of observation, experimentation, connection. As we reflect on his journey from the simple classrooms of Tupelo to the world stage, we can appreciate how each experience, each teacher, each influence contributed to the formation of an artist whose work would touch millions of lives. And as we drift toward sleep, we might imagine young Elvis walking home from school along dusty Memphis streets, perhaps humming a tune he had heard earlier that day, his mind working in its own quiet way, processing all he had seen and heard, preparing for a future he could not yet imagine, but was nonetheless moving toward with each step, with each note, with each lesson absorbed and transformed by his unique sensibility. In this gentle image of a boy becoming himself through the gradual accumulation of experiences and influences, we find a soothing reminder of how our own paths unfold, day by day, lesson by lesson, one quiet moment of growth at a time. Our soothing biography continues with a look at the next important period in this incredible life. From the very beginning, Elvis Presley's life was shaped by voices that sang to him from radios and records, voices that spoke wisdom into his young mind, voices that encouraged him when doubt crept in. These were the mentors, the role models, the quiet guides who walked with him at different stages of his journey, leaving fingerprints on his soul that would last a lifetime. The first voice, of course, was his mother's. Gladys Presley was more than just a parent. She was his safe place, his first audience, his unwavering supporter in the small house in Tupelo, where money was scarce, but love was abundant. Gladys would cradle her son and sing to him old gospel hymns that seeped into his bones. Even as a toddler, Elvis would sway to the melodies, his tiny voice trying to match hers. She recognized something special in him early on, a sensitivity to music that went beyond simple enjoyment. When he was 10, she scraped together enough money to buy him his first guitar, not because he asked for it, but because she sensed he needed it. That act of faith, that quiet belief in his potential, would become the foundation of everything that followed. Then there was the voice of the church, the rich harmonies of the Assembly of God congregation, where Elvis soaked up the raw emotion of gospel music. The preacher's fiery sermons, the wailing choirs, the call and response between the pulpit and the pews, all of it stirred something deep within him. He didn't just hear the music, he felt it. The way one feels the rumble of thunder before the storm arrives. Later in life, long after the world knew his name, he would return to those gospel roots, recording sacred songs that carried the same passion he had absorbed as a boy. Memphis introduced him to new voices, voices that drifted out of Beale Street's blues clubs, voices that crackled from the radio stations playing rhythm and blues. B. King, who was already a rising star in the blues world when a teenage Elvis would slip into his shows, wide-eyed and mesmerized. King's guitar playing, so fluid and expressive, showed Elvis that an instrument could cry, could laugh, could tell a story without words. They would later become friends, with King offering advice to the young singer who seemed so eager to learn. "You got something different," King once told him. And those simple words of affirmation meant more to Elvis than any chart-topping hit ever could. Another guiding light was Sam Phillips, the visionary behind Sun Records. Phillips had an ear for raw talent, and when Elvis walked into his studio in 1953 to record a song for his mother's birthday, Phillips sensed something extraordinary. He didn't rush Elvis into stardom. Instead, he let him experiment, encouraged him to find his own sound. It was Phillips who paired him with guitarist Scotty Moore and bassist Bill Black, creating the trio that would become the backbone of Elvis's early recordings. Phillips knew instantly that they had captured lightning in a bottle. Scotty Moore himself became another mentor, teaching Elvis the nuances of stage presence, how to move with the music rather than against it. Moore was older, more experienced, and he recognized that Elvis had a natural charisma that couldn't be taught. Still, he helped refine it, showing him how to hold a guitar, how to connect with an audience without saying a word. Their partnership was one of mutual respect, with Moore's steadying influence balancing Elvis's wild energy. Then came Colonel Tom Parker, the enigmatic manager who would shape, and some would say complicate, Elvis's career. Parker was a showman in his own right, a master of promotion who saw in Elvis not just a singer, but a phenomenon. He pushed him toward movies, toward merchandising, toward a level of fame few had ever achieved. Their relationship was complex, a mix of genuine affection and calculated business. Parker protected Elvis in many ways, shielding him from bad deals and unscrupulous promoters. But his grip was tight, and over time, Elvis would chafe against the restrictions. Still, in those early years, Parker's guidance was invaluable, helping to steer a young man from Mississippi through the dizzying whirlwind of global fame. Beyond the music industry, Elvis found inspiration in the movies, particularly in the rugged charm of actors like James Dean and Marlon Brando. He studied their performances, their effortless cool, and began to incorporate some of that rebellious energy into his own persona. When he finally met Brando years later, it was a surreal moment, the student face to face with the idol who had unknowingly shaped so much of his image. And then there were the musicians who came before him, the ones whose records he wore out from constant playing. Hank Williams taught him about heartache, about how a voice could break just enough to make the pain feel real. Roy Orbison showed him the power of a soaring melody, while Fats Domino and Little Richard demonstrated that rock and roll could be joyful, uninhibited, full of life. Elvis never saw himself as an originator. He saw himself as a student, blending what he loved from each of them into something uniquely his own. Perhaps the most touching mentorship came later in his life, when Elvis himself became the guide. In the 1970s, he took a young singer named Kathy Westmoreland under his wing, inviting her to sing backup for him and offering gentle advice about the music business. He did the same for others, session musicians, aspiring performers, even fans who wrote him letters. Having been given so much, he understood the importance of passing it on. As we reflect on these relationships, we see how each one contributed another layer to the man Elvis became. Some gave him music, some gave him confidence, some gave him caution, but all of them, in their own way, helped shape the artist who would change the sound of a generation. B. King's blues, Sam Phillips's encouragement, all blending into the rich, unforgettable voice of Elvis himself, a voice that still sings to us, soft and steady, like a gentle hum in the dark. Let your mind float with these gentle recollections as we move forward in our story. The story of Elvis Presley's early career begins in the quiet hum of Memphis, Tennessee, where the rhythms of blues, gospel, and country music drifted through the warm southern air. It was here, in this city of musical crossroads, that a shy young man with a guitar and an unmistakable voice would take his first tentative steps into the world of professional music. His journey was not one of instant fame, but of slow, steady growth, a series of small moments that would eventually build into something extraordinary. In the summer of 1953, Elvis walked into Sun Studio, a small recording facility on Union Avenue, with a simple dream to record a song for his mother's birthday. The receptionist, Marion Kasker, noticed something special in his voice and made a note of it for Sam Phillips, the owner of Sun Records. She jotted down, "Good ballad singer," little knowing how those words would echo through history. Months passed before Elvis returned, but when he did, it would set everything in motion. Sam Phillips had been searching for a sound, something raw, something new, a white singer who could channel the emotion of black rhythm and blues. When Elvis came back in 1954 to record another demo, Phillips paired him with two local musicians, Scotty Moore, a quiet, skilled guitarist, and Bill Black, a jovial bass player. They rehearsed in Scotty's living room, running through country songs and blues numbers, searching for a spark. He sped it up, infused it with a playful energy, and suddenly the room felt different. Scotty and Bill joined in, and just like that, they had stumbled upon something revolutionary. Sam Phillips, listening from the control booth, knew he had found what he was looking for. He rushed them back into the studio to capture the magic on tape. The recording was raw, unfiltered, Elvis's voice, full of youthful exuberance. Scotty's guitar crisp and clean. Bill's bass thumping with an infectious rhythm. When Phillips played the song for Dewey Phillips, a local radio DJ, the reaction was immediate. Dewey played it on his show, Red, Hot, and Blue, and the phone lines lit up. Listeners wanted to know, who was this new singer? Was he black? Was he white? The mystery only added to the excitement. In the studio, he worked tirelessly, experimenting with tempo, with phrasing, until he found the perfect balance of rebellion and charm. Jay Fontana's drums driving the rhythm, and Elvis himself pouring every ounce of himself into the performance. When it was released, the song became an anthem, a declaration of youthful defiance that parents feared and teenagers adored. But Elvis was never just about rebellion. His softer side shone through in ballads like Love Me Tender, a song so gentle, so full of longing, that it seemed to slow time itself. He recorded it for his first film, and though acting was new to him, there was an earnestness in his performance, a vulnerability that made audiences fall in love with him all over again. The song was recorded in just a few takes, Elvis's voice barely above a whisper, as if he were singing directly to each listener, a private serenade in the quiet of the night. As the years passed, his sound evolved, absorbing influences from gospel, blues, country, and even opera. He had an insatiable curiosity for music, always listening, always learning. In the studio, he would often stay late, experimenting with different vocal techniques, pushing himself to find new textures in his voice. He surrounded himself with musicians who challenged him, who brought out the best in him, the soulful backing vocals of the Jordanaires, the lush arrangements of Chet Atkins, the raw energy of his early band. Together, they created something timeless. By the late 1950s, Elvis was not just a singer, but a cultural phenomenon. His television appearances were events, moments when the world seemed to hold its breath. The 1968 comeback special, in particular, was a revelation. After years of Hollywood movies, some felt he had lost touch with his roots. But when he stepped onto that small, intimate stage, dressed in black leather, guitar in hand, it was as if no time had passed at all. His voice was deeper, richer, but the fire was still there. He sang old songs with new intensity, and when he launched into If I Can Dream, a soaring anthem of hope, it felt like a rebirth. Even in Las Vegas, where he later became a fixture, Elvis found ways to reinvent himself. His residency shows were grand, extravagant affairs, with full orchestras, elaborate costumes, and a charisma that filled every corner of the room. Yet beneath the glitter and the sequins, the heart of his performance remained the same, that deep, soulful connection to the music. He could take a simple ballad like Can't Help Falling in Love and make it feel like the most important song in the world, his voice wrapping around the melody like a warm embrace. And then there was Graceland, his sanctuary, the place where he could retreat from the madness of fame. The walls were filled with gold records, awards, reminders of his success. But it was also a home, filled with the laughter of friends, the hum of late-night jam sessions, the quiet moments when he would sit at the piano and play gospel songs, just for himself. Music was never just a career for Elvis. It was his lifeblood, the thing that kept him grounded, even as the world tried to lift him higher. His influence stretched far beyond his own lifetime. Artists from every genre, rock, pop, country, even hip-hop, have cited him as an inspiration. He broke down barriers, blending black and white musical traditions at a time when segregation still divided America. He made it acceptable to be raw, to be emotional, to let the music move you in ways you couldn't explain. And though his life was cut tragically short, his voice remains, a constant presence in the airwaves, in the hum of a late-night radio, in the quiet strum of a guitar played by someone who still dreams of shaking the world the way he once did. As we drift off to sleep, we can still hear it, the echo of his laughter, the warmth of his voice, the way he made every song feel like it was meant just for us. The people who loved him most watched helplessly as he spiraled, torn between respecting his choices and begging him to change. Some stayed, some stepped back, all carrying the weight of what might have been. And so, as we drift into sleep, we can almost see them. Gladys humming in the kitchen, Priscilla dancing with him in the den, the Memphis Mafia laughing around the piano. These were the threads of his life. The people who loved him, who shaped him, who tried to hold him together, even as the world pulled him apart. Their voices linger in the quiet, a gentle reminder that behind the legend was a man who loved deeply, mourned deeply, and left behind echoes of a heart that never truly stopped singing. The music fades now, the stories softening into dreams. And somewhere in the hush of the night, Elvis' voice still whispers, tender as a lullaby, weaving through the years, a melody of love, loss, and all that remains. Allow yourself to sink deeper into comfort as we explore the next phase of this soothing biography. Beyond the flashing lights and screaming crowds, Elvis lived a quieter life, one filled with simple pleasures, deep friendships, and the everyday rhythms that grounded him in the stillness of Graceland, when the world wasn't demanding his voice or his presence. He was just a man who loved his family, cherished his home, and found joy in the little things. His mornings often began late, the soft Tennessee light filtering through the curtains as he stirred from sleep. The house would hum gently around him, the scent of breakfast drifting up from the kitchen, bacon frying, biscuits baking, coffee percolating. He loved meals that reminded him of his childhood, the kind his mother used to make. Even after fame, he never lost his taste for simple Southern comfort. Peanut butter and banana sandwiches, fried chicken, collard greens simmered for hours. Food was more than sustenance. It was memory, connection, a way to feel close to the past. After breakfast, he might wander downstairs to the den, where the piano stood waiting. Some days, he'd play without thinking, his fingers finding old gospel hymns or half-remembered blues tunes. Music was his first language, the one he spoke even when no one was listening. Other times, he'd settle into his favorite chair with a book in hand. He was a voracious reader, drawn to spiritual texts, books on mysticism, and the teachings of the Self-Realization Fellowship. He believed deeply in the idea that there was something more, something beyond the material world, and he sought answers in the pages of those books. underlining passages that spoke to him. His friendships were the backbone of his private life. The Memphis Mafia, as they were called, weren't just employees or hangers-on, they were his brothers. They rode motorcycles together, played pickup football in the yard, sat up late into the night, telling stories and laughing until their sides ached. There was a warmth in those moments, a feeling of belonging that fame couldn't replicate. They protected him, teased him, and kept him company in a world that often saw him as something other than human. And then there were the quiet afternoons spent with Lisa Marie, his little girl. He adored her in a way that softened every hard edge in his life. They'd play in the yard, him pushing her on the swing, her laughter ringing through the trees. He'd read her bedtime stories, doing voices for each character, or sing her lullabies in that deep, gentle voice of his. Those were the moments he held closest, the ones where he was simply daddy, where the weight of being Elvis didn't exist. Evenings at Graceland often unfolded like slow, golden dreams. If he wasn't performing or recording, he might invite friends over for a movie in the den. He loved films, not just the ones he starred in, but old westerns, biblical epics, anything that told a story. The projector would flicker to life, the room darkening as the screen glowed. When he returned in 1960, he wasn't the same wild-haired kid who had left. He was more mature, more controlled, ready to reclaim his throne. His comeback special in 1968 proved that the fire was still there, that he could still command a stage like no one else. But what if he had avoided the draft? Would he have burned out faster, lost in the whirlwind of fame without that forced pause? Or would he have evolved even sooner, pushing his music into new, uncharted directions? The army was a detour, but in some ways, it saved him, giving him space to breathe, to remember who he was beneath the fame. The movies were another crossroads. In the 1960s, Elvis became a Hollywood star, churning out light-hearted musicals that made money, but often lacked depth. Colonel Parker saw them as easy paydays, and for a while, Elvis went along with it, enjoying the glamour and the steady paycheck. But as the years passed, he grew restless. The scripts were formulaic, the songs forgettable. He longed to do serious acting, to prove he was more than a pretty face with a guitar. He nearly got his chance with films like A Star is Born, but Parker intervened, steering him back towards safer projects. What if Elvis had fought harder for those dramatic roles? Could he have been more than a musical icon, a respected actor, a true artist in another medium? Or would the risk have backfired, leaving him without the safety net of his singing career? The movies kept him famous, but they also kept him trapped, a prisoner of his own success. And then there was Graceland. In 1957, at just 22 years old, Elvis bought the mansion that would become his sanctuary. It was a statement. A poor boy from Tupelo now lived like a king. But it was also a retreat, a place where he could escape the chaos of fame. The walls echoed with music, with laughter, with the quiet moments when Elvis would sit alone at the piano, playing gospel hymns in the dark. Graceland grounded him, reminding him of where he came from even as the world tried to pull him in 1,000 directions. But what if he had never bought it? Would he have spiraled faster, lost in the haze of hotels and tour buses, with no place to call home? Graceland was his anchor, but it was also his gilded cage, a place where he could hide from the world, but also where the world could no longer reach him. The final turning point came in the 1970s, as his health began to fail. The years of touring, the pills, the pressure, it was all catching up to him. He still had moments of brilliance on stage, flashes of the old magic, but the toll was undeniable. Some around him urged him to rest, to step away, to heal, but Elvis kept going, driven by loyalty to his fans, by the need to prove he still had it. What if he had listened? What if he had taken a year off, sought real help, returned stronger? Would we remember him differently, not as a tragic figure, but as a survivor, a man who conquered his demons? Or was the ending inevitable, the price of a life lived at full throttle? Elvis' story is one of choices, some brilliant, some heartbreaking, all shaping the legend we know today. And as we drift into sleep, we can almost hear him still, that voice floating through the years, a reminder of what was, what might have been, and what will always be. The calming story continues as we gently examine what happened next in this remarkable journey. Elvis Presley's life was woven with deep connections, some tender, some turbulent, all shaping the man behind the legend. His relationships were like the chords of a ballad, rising and falling in harmony, sometimes soft and sweet, other times aching with longing. From the unwavering love of his parents to the complicated bonds with lovers and friends, these ties colored his world, lifting him to heights of joy and pulling him into valleys of sorrow. At the center of it all was Gladys, his mother, a woman whose love for her son was boundless from the moment he was born. She cradled him close, her devotion fierce and protective. Elvis never forgot the sound of her voice singing gospel hymns, the way her hands would smooth his hair when he was a boy. She was his first audience, his first believer. And even as fame took him far from home, her absence left a quiet ache in his heart. When she passed away in 1958, a piece of him seemed to go with her. Years later, he would still visit her grave, whispering to her as if she could still hear him, seeking comfort in the memory of her love. His father, Vernon, was a quieter presence, a man who carried his own burdens. Their relationship shifted over the years, sometimes strained by the pressures of fame, sometimes softened by shared grief after Gladys' death. Vernon became his manager, a role that blurred the lines between father and businessman. But through it all, there remained a deep, unspoken bond. In his final years, Elvis leaned on Vernon more than ever, relying on his steady presence as the world around him grew heavier. was Priscilla, the young woman who captured his heart in Germany while he was stationed there during his army service. She was just 14 when they met, a vision of dark hair and quiet grace. Their love story unfolded slowly, a courtship filled with letters and longing, before she finally moved to Graceland to be with him. Their marriage was a fairy tale in the eyes of the world, but behind closed doors, it was more complicated, strained by distance, by his relentless schedule, by the temptations that came with fame. Yet even after their divorce, there was tenderness between them, a mutual respect that never faded. She remained one of the few who truly understood the weight of his life, the loneliness that came with being Elvis among his friends. Few were as loyal as the Memphis Mafia, the tight-knit group of childhood pals and confidants who surrounded him for decades. They were his brothers in laughter and mischief, the ones who shared late-night jam sessions and endless road trips. But these friendships, too, carried shadows. Some enabled his worst habits. Others tried in vain to pull him back from the edge. Red West, his longtime bodyguard and friend, once wrote him a heartfelt letter pleading with him to take care of himself. A plea that went unheeded. The bonds were deep, but even love couldn't always save him from himself. Professionally, Elvis collaborations were just as defining. Colonel Tom Parker, his enigmatic manager, was both a guiding force and a source of frustration. Parker's shrewd business sense built Elvis' empire, but his relentless demands also chipped away at the artist's spirit. There were moments of rebellion, Elvis pushing back, insisting on creative control, but the dynamic was always uneven, a dance between loyalty and constraint. Then there were the musicians who shaped his sound. Scotty Moore's guitar licks on That's All Right ignited rock and roll itself, and the Jordanaires' harmonies lifted his gospel recordings to something celestial. In the studio, he found kinship with producers like Felton Jarvis, who understood his need to experiment, to chase the perfect take until his voice was raw with emotion. These were the people who helped him translate what he felt into music, who stood beside him as he poured his soul into every note. Perhaps one of the most poignant relationships in his later years was with Lisa Marie, his daughter. She was his greatest joy, the light in his darkest hours. He doted on her, showering her with gifts, singing her to sleep with lullabies. In her, he saw innocence, a chance to give the love he so deeply craved himself. Even as his health faltered, he tried to be present for her, though the demands of his life often pulled him away. Their time together was fleeting, but the love was immeasurable. As the 1970s wore on, the strain of these relationships became clearer. Sometimes he'd fall asleep halfway through, lulled by the hum of the film and the comfort of being surrounded by people he loved. His faith was another quiet anchor. He grew up in the church, and gospel music never left his heart. Late at night, when the house was still, he'd sit at the piano and play play Peace in the Valley, or How Great Thou Art, his voice hushed but full of feeling. Those songs were his prayers, his way of reaching for something greater than himself. He carried a deep reverence for the divine, even when his life felt far from holy. There were darker moments, 2 times when the pressures of fame, the loss of his mother, the unraveling of his marriage, all weighed too heavily. In those hours, he'd retreat, seeking solace in the things that had always steadied him: music, books, the familiar walls of Graceland. The people who loved him worried, but they also understood. They knew the boy from Tupelo was still in there, beneath the glittering jumpsuits and the adoration of millions. But tonight, as sleep draws near, let's remember him as he was in the calm, ordinary moments. The way he'd toss a football in the backyard, the sound of his laughter echoing through the halls, the way he'd hum under his breath as he flipped through a new record. He was a man who loved deeply, who found joy in simple things, who carried his past with him even as the future rushed forward. And so, as the night deepens and the stories settle like dust in the lamplight, we can almost hear it, the faint sound of a piano, a voice singing softly, a melody that lingers long after the last note fades. It's the sound of a life lived fully, imperfectly, beautifully. A life that even now whispers through the years, reminding us that behind every legend there is a man who loved, who dreamed, who still sings us to sleep like a gentle river flowing toward the sea. Our story continues with the next meaningful chapter. In the quiet hours of morning, before the world stirred, Elvis Presley often found his softest moments in his early years, before fame swept him into its whirlwind. He rose with the sun, the way he had in Tupelo, slowly, sleepily, rubbing his eyes as he stepped into the day. The scent of coffee and frying bacon would drift through the small house, his mother humming as she moved about the kitchen. He'd sit at the table, still half dreaming, listening to the radio, letting the sounds of country and gospel wash over him like a warm blanket. Later, when Graceland became his sanctuary, mornings took on a different rhythm. He slept late, often well into the afternoon, the heavy curtains of his bedroom keeping the daylight at bay. His nights were long, filled with music and friends, so his mornings began in the hush of a house still settling. When he finally stirred, he'd reach for the books piled beside his bed, spiritual texts, histories, novels with dog-eared pages. He read slowly, thoughtfully, letting the words sink in. Then, with a stretch, he'd rise, padding barefoot across the thick carpet to the adjoining bathroom, where the faucet ran warm, steam curling in the air. Breakfast was never a hurried affair, even in the busiest years. He savored his meals, the way a man who had known hunger never took food for granted. In the Graceland dining room, under the glow of the chandelier, he'd sit down to plates of fluffy scrambled eggs, crisp bacon, buttered toast, and sometimes, when he was feeling indulgent, a stack of golden pancakes drizzled with syrup. He drank orange juice fresh squeezed, the tart sweetness waking his senses, and coffee with cream, sipping it slowly as he flipped through the morning papers, or chatted with whoever was at the table. Midday, when the sun was high, he might wander downstairs to the basement, where the walls were lined with records. He'd run his fingers over the spines, pulling out an album here and there, placing it gently on the turntable. The music would fill the room, and he'd lean back, eyes closed, letting it carry him. Sometimes he'd pick up a guitar, strumming absently, his voice soft as he sang along. Other days, he'd head outside, where the Memphis air was thick and sweet, and toss a football with friends, or take one of his horses for a slow ride around the grounds. Work, when it called, was a flurry of activity studio sessions that stretched late into the night. Rehearsals where he'd run a song over and over until it felt just right. In the recording booth, he'd stand close to the microphone, his voice curling around the lyrics, his body swaying slightly with the rhythm. The musicians around him would follow his lead, the music building, layer upon layer, until it was something alive. Between takes, he'd laugh, crack jokes, sip from a bottle of soda, his energy infectious. But it was the evenings, the quiet ones, that felt most like home. After dinner, perhaps a hearty southern meal of fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and collard greens, he'd settle into the living room, sinking into the plush couch. The television might flicker in the corner, a movie playing at low volume, but more often, conversation filled the space. Friends lounged around him, their voices a gentle murmur, the clink of ice in glasses, a soothing counterpoint. He'd lean back, one arm draped over the couch, his fingers tapping out a rhythm on his knee. Late at night, when the house grew still, he'd retreat to his bedroom, the sanctuary at the end of the hall. The room was dim, lit by the soft glow of lamps, the bed piled high with pillows. He'd change into pajamas, always silk, always elegant, and slip beneath the covers. Sometimes sleep came easily, the weight of the day lifting as he drifted off. Other nights, his mind raced, and he'd reach for a book or the notepad on his nightstand, scribbling down lyrics or thoughts that wouldn't quiet. And then, in the deepest hours, when even Graceland slept, he might sit at the piano in the corner of the room, his fingers finding the keys without thought. The music would be soft, a private lullaby just for him. The notes would rise and fall, a melody half remembered, half invented. And for a little while, the world outside didn't exist. There was only the song, the night, and the man who, despite everything, still found peace in the music. It was in these quiet rhythms, the slow mornings, the unhurried meals, the evenings filled with laughter and music, that he was most himself. Not the king, not the icon, just Elvis, a man who loved his home, his people, the simple pleasure of a good song on a quiet night. And as the years passed, no matter how much changed, these small rituals remained, steady as a heartbeat, gentle as a lullaby. So tonight, as sleep tugs at your eyelids, Imagine him there in the lamplight, humming softly to himself. The day is done, the music lingers, and somewhere in the quiet, he's still singing. As your thoughts grow quieter, we'll continue our peaceful exploration of this fascinating life. Elvis Presley's philosophy was never something he wrote down in a manifesto or preached from a stage. It wasn't a set of rules, but a feeling, a way of moving through the world that was as natural to him as breathing. If you had to put it into words, you might say it was about sincerity, about being real. Even when the world wanted him to be a symbol, he once said, "Truth is like the sun." And in his own way, Elvis lived by that, even when the spotlight made it hard to see clearly. From the beginning, he believed in the power of music to connect people, to bring joy, to heal. It wasn't just about fame or success, though those things came. It was about the way a song could make someone's day brighter, or how a melody could carry a memory. He grew up in Tupelo, Mississippi, where life was simple, but not always easy, and music was the thread that held everything together. His mother, Gladys, would sing to him old gospel hymns that wrapped around him like a warm blanket. Those early years taught him that music wasn't just sound, it was love, it was comfort, it was home. As a young man, he carried that belief with him, even when the world tried to shape him into something else. When he first stepped into Sun's studio, he wasn't thinking about becoming a star. He just wanted to make something honest. Sam Phillips, the producer who first recorded him, later said that what set Elvis apart wasn't just his voice, but his ability to lose himself in the music, to let it move through him without pretense. That was the heart of it. Elvis never performed a song, he lived it. Whether it was the raw energy of "That's All Right," or the aching tenderness of "Love Me Tender," he gave every note his whole self. His generosity was another quiet cornerstone of who he was. Fame brought him wealth, but he never saw it as something to hoard. He gave freely to strangers, to friends, to charities he never talked about. There were stories of him buying cars for people he just met, paying off debts for struggling families, handing out $100 bills like they were spare change. It wasn't about showing off. It was his way of saying that if he had enough, he should share it. "I don't want to be rich," he once told a friend, but life wasn't always simple. Even for Elvis, there were times when he struggled, when the bright lights felt more like a cage than a stage. Yet, even then, his core never changed. He found solace in the things that had always mattered to him: his faith, his family, his music. He leaned into gospel songs, not because they were hits, but because they reminded him of his roots, of sitting in church with his mother, feeling something bigger than himself. "Gospel music is the purest thing there is," he said. But he also believed in loyalty, sometimes to a fault. The people around him, his band, his friends, the Memphis Mafia, were more than employees, they were family. He surrounded himself with those who knew him before the fame, who remembered the boy who loved peanut butter and banana sandwiches and late-night jam sessions, even when the world saw him as untouchable. He needed those connections, those reminders of who he really was. "You don't have to be alone to be lonely," he once mused. And in those words, you could hear the quiet ache of a man who, despite the crowds, sometimes felt the distance between himself and the world. As the years passed, his philosophy deepened. The young rebel who shook up the world with his hips became a man who valued stillness, too. He spent hours reading, searching for meaning in books about spirituality, philosophy, even karate, which he said taught him discipline and respect. He never stopped learning, never stopped questioning. And through it all, music remained his anchor. Whether he was on stage in Vegas or alone at the piano at Graceland, it was the one place where he could be completely himself. In the end, Elvis's worldview was simple, but not shallow. He believed in kindness, in giving, in staying true to yourself, no matter what. He believed in the power of a song to lift someone's spirit, in the importance of remembering where you came from. And most of all, he believed in love, not the flashy, dramatic kind, but the steady, everyday sort. The love of family, of friends, of a shared moment in the dark while the music plays. So tonight, as the world outside grows quiet, think of him not as the legend, but as the man. The one who laughed easily, who gave without hesitation, who found peace in the simple act of singing. His life was complicated, as all lives are, but his heart was clear. And somewhere, in the soft hum of a melody, in the glow of a lamplight, that heart still beats. Let that thought drift with you now, gentle as a lullaby. As sleep pulls you closer, the music fades, the night deepens, and somewhere, Elvis is still singing just for you. With each breath becoming slower and deeper, let us turn to another aspect of this soothing story. Elvis Presley's life, though filled with dazzling highs, was also marked by quiet struggles, the kind that shape a person just as deeply as their triumphs. From the very beginning, his path was never smooth, never effortless. Even as a boy growing up in Tupelo, Mississippi, he knew the weight of hardship. His family lived in a small, 2-room house, and money was always tight. His father, Vernon, worked odd jobs, sometimes struggling to provide, while his mother, Gladys, did her best to shield young Elvis from the harshness of the world. There were nights when the hum of an old radio was their only comfort, filling the dimly lit room with songs that made the struggles feel lighter. If only for a little while, when Elvis was just 13, his family moved to Memphis, hoping for a fresh start. But even there, life was far from easy. He was a shy boy, often teased for his quiet nature, and his love of music, something other kids didn't always understand. He found solace in the gospel music of the local churches, in the blues drifting out from Beale Street, in the way a melody could wrap around loneliness and make it bearable. He worked odd jobs after school, saving up to buy his first guitar, a modest instrument that would become his companion through many long nights of practice. And then, when fame came, it arrived like a whirlwind, sudden, overwhelming, impossible to control. His early performances were met with both adoration and scorn. Critics dismissed him, calling his music vulgar, his movements too wild. Parents shielded their children from his influence, while teenagers screamed and swooned in equal measure. The backlash was fierce, and at times it hurt. But Elvis never lashed out, never let bitterness take root. Instead, he leaned into the music, trusting that if he stayed true to himself, the noise would fade. He learned early that fame was a double-edged sword, bringing him everything he had ever dreamed of, while also chipping away at the quiet, ordinary life he had once known. The army was another turning point, a pause in the middle of his meteoric rise. At the height of his career, he was drafted, forced to step away from the stage for 2 years. Some saw it as the end, but Elvis never complained. He served quietly, dutifully, finding comfort in the routine, in the chance to be just another soldier. It was during this time that he lost his mother, Gladys, the woman who had been his anchor, his fiercest protector. The grief was immense, a wound that never fully healed. But even in his sorrow, he carried on, honoring her memory by holding tight to the values she had taught him: kindness, humility, love. The years that followed were filled with both brilliance and struggle. Hollywood beckoned, offering him a new kind of fame. But the films, though successful, often felt hollow. He longed to make music that mattered, to break free from the formulaic roles he was given. Behind the scenes, the pressures of fame weighed on him, the constant scrutiny, the endless demands, the feeling of being trapped in his own legend. There were moments when he doubted himself, when the expectations felt too heavy. But he always returned to the music, to the one place where he felt most alive. In the late 1960s, when critics declared his career over, he staged a comeback, a triumphant return to the stage that reminded the world why he was the king. The 1968 television special, often called the comeback special, was raw, unfiltered, a return to his roots. Sitting in a circle with his old friends, playing the songs that had first set his soul on fire, he seemed to rediscover himself. It was proof that no matter how far he had strayed, the heart of his music remained unchanged. But even success couldn't shield him from personal battles. The later years were marked by health struggles, by the slow erosion of his vitality, the demands of touring, the weight of expectations, the loneliness that came with being so beloved, yet so isolated. It all took its toll, yet through it all, he never stopped giving. He gave to his fans, to strangers, to charities, often in secret, never seeking praise. He gave until there was little left, a reflection of the boundless generosity his mother had instilled in him. In the end, Elvis's life was a tapestry of light and shadow, of soaring highs and quiet sorrows. But through every challenge, He carried the same spirit, the boy from Tupelo, who believed in the power of a song, in the importance of kindness, in the simple act of giving love. His struggles didn't define him, but they shaped him, softening his edges, deepening his music, reminding him of what truly mattered. And so, as you drift toward sleep, think of him not just as the icon, but as the man who faced storms and still chose to sing, the one who knew loss, but never let it harden his heart, the one who, even in his quietest moments, found solace in the music that had always been his refuge. The night is soft around you now, the world hushed and still, and somewhere in the distance, a melody lingers, a gentle reminder that even in the face of struggle, the song goes on. The tapestry of this remarkable life unfolds further as we gently explore the next meaningful period beyond the sequined jumpsuits and the electrifying stage presence, beyond the voice that could shake a room or soothe a broken heart. Elvis Presley harbored quieter passions, hidden layers that few ever saw. He was a man of contradictions, both flamboyant and shy. A global superstar who cherished solitude. A lover of excess who found joy in the simplest things. One of his lesser-known loves was reading in the quiet hours between performances and recording sessions. Elvis often lost himself in books, his curiosity spanning philosophy, spirituality, and history. He had a deep fascination with religion, studying not just Christianity, but also texts on mysticism and the occult. His library at Graceland held volumes on everything from the teachings of Gandhi to the prophecies of Nostradamus. Sometimes, late at night, he would sit alone in his meditation garden, flipping through pages under soft lamplight, searching for answers to life's bigger questions. He was also a man of surprising physical discipline when he wanted to be. Though his later years were marked by health struggles, in his prime, he trained in karate with a quiet dedication. He earned a black belt, not for show, but because he respected the art's philosophy of control and focus. There were moments away from the cameras when he would practice his forms in the backyard of Graceland, moving with a precision that contrasted sharply with his wild stage persona. Then there was his voice, not just the singing voice the world knew, but the way he could mimic others with uncanny accuracy. Friends recalled how he would entertain them with impressions, slipping effortlessly into the voices of Dean Martin, James Dean, or even his own manager, Colonel Parker. It was a playful side of him, one that surfaced in private, where he didn't have to be Elvis the King, but could just be Elvis, the boy from Mississippi who loved to make people laugh. His generosity was another quiet force in his life. He didn't just give money, he gave moments, gestures that lingered in memory long after the act itself. There was the time he overheard a fan mention she couldn't afford a wedding dress. He secretly arranged for one to be delivered to her, or the night he bought every Cadillac on a dealership lot, then handed them out to strangers. But more often, His kindness was anonymous, paying off hospital bills, sending groceries to struggling families, slipping cash into the hands of those who needed it, without ever letting his name be attached. Despite his love for the spotlight, he had a deep need for quiet. He would sometimes sneak away from Graceland in the middle of the night, driving his car through Memphis with the windows down. No entourage, no fans, just him and the hum of the engine. Those solitary drives were his way of reconnecting with the world outside the bubble of fame, a chance to remember what it felt like to be unseen. And then there were his animals. Graceland wasn't just a home for him. It was a sanctuary for pets of all kinds. Dogs, horses, even a chimpanzee named Scatter, who became something of a mischievous companion. Elvis had a soft spot for creatures who needed care, perhaps because he saw in them the same vulnerability he so often hid behind his smile. In his final years, when the weight of fame grew heavy, he found comfort in the piano room at Graceland, playing gospel songs in the dim light, his voice softer now, more reflective. Those who heard him in those moments said it was like listening to a man whispering to his soul. The music no longer for an audience, but for himself. So tonight, as sleep begins to pull you under, think of him not just as the legend, but as the man who read books under lamplight, who practiced karate in the stillness of morning, who drove through Memphis just to feel the night air on his face. Think of the laughter he shared in private, the quiet acts of kindness no one saw, the moments when he was simply Elvis, flawed, searching, endlessly human. And as you drift away, imagine the sound of a piano in a quiet room, playing a melody only he could hear, a song for no one but himself. The notes linger in the air, soft and fading, just like the edges of a dream. Good night. As you settle more comfortably, our narrative flows onward like soft moonlight across still waters. To understand Elvis Presley, one must first drift back to the world that shaped him, a world still trembling from the aftershocks of war, a world where old traditions and new beginnings collided in the warm, slow-moving air of the American South. He was born in 1935 in the small town of Tupelo, Mississippi, a place where the Great Depression weighed heavy over red clay roads and humble clapboard houses. The air smelled of pine and earth, and the sound of gospel music drifted from church windows on Sunday mornings, the voices rising with hope even in hard times. It was a world of simple things, hand-me-down clothes, front porch conversations, and radios crackling with the songs that would one day weave themselves into the fabric of his soul. The years of his childhood were marked by struggle, but also by the quiet resilience of his parents, Vernon and Gladys, who loved him fiercely. They moved to Memphis when he was still a boy, chasing something better, something that shimmered just beyond their reach. Memphis was different, bigger, louder, alive, with the pulse of blues drifting from Beale Street, where black musicians played the music that would later seep into his own. The city was a crossroads, a place where the old rural South met the modern world, where trains rumbled through the night, carrying dreams and freight alike. It was here that Elvis, a shy boy with a guitar, began to absorb the sounds around him, the raw emotion of the blues, the deep comfort of gospel, the twang of country ballads that told stories of heartache and home. By the time he stepped into Sun's studio in 1954 to record a song for his mother, the world was already shifting. The war had ended, but the Cold War hummed in the background. A tension felt even in the sleepy corners of America. Teenagers, for the first time, were seen as a distinct group, not just young adults, but a generation with their own desires, their own rebellion. And Elvis, with his hip-shaking swagger and that voice raw, untamed, dripping with emotion, became the sound of that rebellion. Though he never set out to be, he was just a boy who loved music, who sang the way he felt it, with his whole body, his whole heart. The 1950s unfolded like a technicolor dream. All bright cars and neon signs, drive-in movies and soda shops, but beneath the shiny surface, the country was restless. The civil rights movement was stirring, the first tremors of change that would reshape America. Elvis, raised in a world where black and white were kept rigidly apart, found himself drawn to the music of those who had been pushed to the margins. He listened to Arthur Crudup, to Big Mama Thornton, to the voices that sang of pain and joy in equal measure. And when he sang their songs, he did so with a reverence, a recognition that he was standing on ground they had paved. Television was still new then, a glowing box that brought the world into living rooms. And when Elvis appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, the effect was electric. Parents clutched their pearls. Preachers warned of sinful influences. But the kids understood. He was something entirely new. A white boy who sang like he had the blues in his bones, who moved like nothing they'd ever seen. The cameras only showed him from the waist up, but it didn't matter. The energy was there, wild and undeniable. And suddenly, the world was his. But fame, as it always does, came with a cost. The 1960s arrived with a roar, Beatlemania, Vietnam, the assassinations of leaders who had once seemed untouchable. Elvis, now a movie star churning out lightweight musicals, watched as the culture moved on without him. The music he loved was changing, growing louder, angrier, more experimental. He was still adored, still the king, but the crown felt heavier now. The army had taken 2 years of his youth. Hollywood had taken more. And by the time he returned to the stage in 1968 for his comeback special, he was a man reclaiming something he'd nearly lost himself. That special, dressed in black leather, singing as if his life depended on it, reminded the world why they'd fallen in love with him in the first place. But the world he returned to was not the one he'd left. The 70s dawned with a haze of excess, bigger concerts, longer tour, the glittering chaos of Las Vegas. He filled arenas, broke records, but the pace was relentless. The music industry had become a machine, and he was its brightest star, though sometimes it seemed the light was burning him from within. And yet, in the quiet moments, he was still that boy from Tupelo. He read books late into the night, searching for something he couldn't name. He gave generously, often anonymously, to strangers in need. He loved the stillness of Graceland, the familiar creak of the floorboards, the way the sunlight filtered through the trees in the morning. But the world never stopped asking for more, and the weight of being Elvis, the expectations, the demands, the endless performances began to wear on him. By the mid-1970s, the cultural landscape had shifted again. Disco ruled the airwaves. Punk was brewing in basements, and the music he'd helped create seemed like a relic of another time. He still performed, still sang with that voice that could shake a room, but the fire was flickering. The pills that had once helped him keep up with the pace now dragged him down. And in those final years, when the crowds dispersed and the lights dimmed, he would retreat to the piano room, playing the gospel songs of his childhood, the ones that spoke of salvation and peace. He left the world in 1977, too soon, too young, but the music never really faded. It lingers still, in the crackle of old records, in the hum of a late-night radio station, in the way a stranger might still catch themselves swaying to "Can't Help Falling in Love" without realizing why. The music grew louder, angrier, more complex. Elvis, for all his early fire, seemed to recede into the background, making movies and singing ballads while the world moved on. But even then, his influence was everywhere. The British invasion bands that dominated the decade had all grown up on his records. The rebellious spirit of rock had his fingerprints all over it. And when he staged his comeback in 1968, slipping into that black leather suit and reminding the world just how electric he could be, it was as if no time had passed at all. The king was back, if only for a little while. And then, too soon, he was gone. The years of excess, the pills, the pressure, it all caught up with him in the end. But the music didn't die with him. It seeped into the walls of recording studios, into the DNA of every artist who came after. You can hear it in the croon of a young Bruce Springsteen, in the hip-swiveling bravado of Prince, in the way modern stars still borrow his stage presence, his vocal tricks, his effortless cool. His face is still one of the most recognizable in the world. His voice still instantly familiar, whether echoing through a stadium or humming softly from a jukebox in some quiet diner. Even now, decades later, there's something about Elvis that feels alive. Maybe it's the way his songs still sound fresh. How Hound Dog can make a room shake just as it did in 1956. Maybe it's the way every generation seems to rediscover him. Teenagers stumbling upon his movies or his early Sun record sessions and feeling that same spark their grandparents did. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe some voices are just too big to fade away. So tonight, as you drift toward sleep, think of all the voices that have carried his echo. Think of the singers who stole a little of his growl, the guitarists who borrowed his rhythm, the countless fans who still play his records when they need to feel something. The world moves fast, faster now than ever, but some things stay with us. The sound of a voice that could be tender one moment, fierce the next. The memory of a man who changed everything without ever seeming to try. The quiet knowledge that somewhere, in some corner of the universe, the king is still singing, still swaying, still young. Let that thought settle over you like a warm blanket, soft and familiar. And as sleep pulls you under, let the music carry you back to Memphis, to 1954, to the moment a shy boy stepped up to a microphone and set the world on fire. The night is quiet now, the air still, but if you listen closely, you might just hear it, the faintest hum of a guitar, the ghost of a voice, singing you into dreams. Good night. With the gentleness of falling snow, we transition now to another meaningful chapter in this life story. There's a story about Elvis, one that doesn't often make the highlight reels, but says so much about who he was. It was 1956, and he was already a sensation. His face on magazine covers, his voice on every radio. But one night, after a show in Las Vegas, he slipped away from the crowds and found himself in a small diner near the outskirts of town. The place was nearly empty, just a waitress wiping down the counter, and a couple of truckers sipping coffee in the corner. Elvis sat at the counter, ordered a grilled cheese and a milkshake, and struck up a conversation with the waitress. She had no idea who he was. He liked that. For a little while, he was just another young man passing through. No screaming fans, no flashing cameras. Before he left, he paid for the truckers' meals without saying a word, just a quiet kindness tucked into the folds of an ordinary night. That was the thing about Elvis. He carried his fame lightly, never letting it harden him. Even at the height of his stardom, he remained startlingly human. The world that made him is gone now, but the echoes remain, the sound of a voice that could be tender and wild in the same breath. The memory of a man who was, in the end, just searching for the same things we all are. Love, meaning, a little peace. So tonight, as sleep tugs gently at your thoughts, let the past wash over you like a slow southern rain. Picture the neon glow of a Memphis night, the hum of a radio playing in the dark, the quiet strum of a guitar on a front porch, and somewhere in the distance, just beyond the edge of hearing, there's a voice singing soft, familiar, forever young. Let it carry you into dreams where the music never really ends and the stories live on. Good night. Let the rhythm of these words carry you further into relaxation as we continue our peaceful journey. Elvis Presley stepped onto the stage of history like a quiet storm, a boy from Tupelo with a voice that carried the weight of something much larger than himself. In the beginning, it was just a sound raw, untamed, a fusion of gospel, blues, and country that shouldn't have worked, but did. Yet, within a few short years, that sound became a revolution, reshaping not just music, but the very fabric of American culture. The world would never be the same after him, though few could have guessed it at the time. In those early days, when he first swayed his hips on national television, the reaction was immediate. Some were scandalized, others entranced, but no one could look away. The way he moved, the way he sang, it was as if he had tapped into something primal, something that had been waiting beneath the surface of polite society. Parents clutched their pearls, teenagers screamed, and critics dismissed him as a passing fad. But the children of the 1950s, the ones who had grown up in the shadow of war and conformity, recognized something in him, a freedom they hadn't known they were missing. He wasn't just a singer, he was a signal, a sign that the rules were changing. And change they did. Before Elvis, rock and roll was a niche sound, a blend of rhythm and blues played in small clubs and on late-night radio. After Elvis, it was the heartbeat of a generation. He didn't invent rock and roll, but he gave it a face, a voice, a swagger that made it irresistible. Young musicians who heard him, John Lennon, Bruce Springsteen, even Bob Dylan, would later say that hearing Elvis for the first time was like a lightning strike. The moment they knew what they wanted to do with their lives. He was the spark that ignited 1,000 careers, the first domino in a chain reaction that would shape music for decades. His influence wasn't just in sound, but in style. The way he dressed, the high collars, the sleek suits, the rebellious leather became the uniform of a new kind of star. Before him, male singers were often polished, proper, almost stiff. Elvis moved with an ease that suggested he didn't care what anyone thought. And suddenly, neither did his fans. He made it okay to be bold, to be sensual, to be unapologetically yourself in a world still clinging to the rigid norms of the past. That was nothing short of revolutionary. But perhaps his greatest impact was in the way he blurred lines, racial, cultural, generational, at a time when segregation was still the law in much of America. Elvis openly celebrated black music. He never pretended to be anything other than what he was, a white boy from Mississippi who loved gospel and blues. But his reverence for those traditions was clear. He sang songs written by black artists, worked with black musicians, and in doing so, helped bring their music to audiences who might never have heard it otherwise. B. King, Jackie Wilson, knew the truth. He wasn't stealing. He was sharing, amplifying, giving credit where it was due. By the 1960s, the world had caught up to him, and then, in some ways, passed him by. The Beatles arrived, then the Rolling Stones, then Dylan with his poetic rebellion. He loved simple pleasures, peanut butter and banana sandwiches fried in butter, late-night drives with the windows down, the sound of gospel music filling the rooms of Graceland. He had a childlike wonder about the world, collecting police badges, and giving away cars to strangers just because he could. Once, when a fan wrote to him saying she wished she could afford a refrigerator, he sent her one. No fanfare, no press release. Just Elvis being Elvis. There were quieter moments, too, glimpses of the boy he had been before the world knew his name. He never forgot where he came from, the shotgun house in Tupelo. The nights his family relied on the kindness of neighbors to put food on the table. Even after he bought Graceland, he kept the grounds open to fans, letting them walk up the driveway, take pictures, leave notes at the gates. He understood what it meant to dream, and he never wanted to shut anyone out. One of the most revealing stories about him happened backstage at one of his early concerts. A young singer, nervous and trembling, was about to go on before him. Elvis noticed, pulled him aside, and said, "Just go out there and give 'em all you got." Then he handed the kid his own jacket to wear on stage, a small gesture of encouragement. That was Elvis, always lifting others up, always remembering what it felt like to be the underdog. His generosity wasn't just about material things. He had a way of making people feel seen. There's a famous story about a woman who waited outside a hotel for hours just to catch a glimpse of him. When he finally came out, instead of rushing past, he stopped, took her hand, and asked her name. Then he said, "Well, Linda, you've been standing out here a long time." And he did. He brought her a chair, sat with her for a few minutes, and made sure she was comfortable before he left. Even in the whirlwind of his fame, he found ways to stay grounded. He loved riding his horses at Graceland, the quiet rhythm of hooves on dirt, the way the world slowed down for a little while. In those moments, he was just a man who loved the sky, the stillness, the simple beauty of being alive. Of course, there were flashes of the playful, mischievous Elvis, too. He loved practical jokes, hiding whoopee cushions in dressing rooms, switching out sugar for salt when his bandmates weren't looking. Once, during a recording session, he pretended to forget the lyrics to a song he'd sung 100 times, just to see the producer's reaction. Then he burst out laughing and nailed the take in one go. He never lost that sense of play, that joy in the moment. And then there was the music. Always the music. Even when he wasn't on stage, he was singing in the studio, in the car, at home late at night. He'd call up friends at odd hours, just to play them a new song he'd discovered. His voice was a force of nature, but it was also something deeply personal, a gift he shared freely. So tonight, as you drift toward sleep, think of these small moments, these quiet stories that made up the man behind the legend. The way he laughed, the way he listened, the way he made strangers feel like friends. The world may remember him as the king, but in these glimpses, he's just Elvis, a boy from Mississippi who never stopped dreaming, never stopped giving, never stopped loving the sound of a song floating through the night. Let these stories settle over you like a lullaby, soft and warm. And as you close your eyes, Imagine the hum of a guitar in the distance, the faint echo of a voice that still feels alive. The night is deep now, the stars gentle overhead. Somewhere beyond the silence, the music plays on. Good night. As your eyelids grow heavier, we'll softly explore another dimension of this fascinating biography. As the years rolled on, like the slow turning of a record under a needle, Elvis's music deepened, his voice carrying not just the energy of youth, but the weight of experience. There was something richer in the way he sang now, something that seemed to hold all the stories of his life, the triumphs, the heartaches, the quiet nights, and the roaring crowds. Even in his later years, when the world thought they knew everything about him, he still had surprises left. In the 1970s, he returned to the stage with a renewed passion, his concerts becoming grand spectacles of sound and light. The jumpsuits he wore sparkled under the stage lights, each one more elaborate than the last, like costumes fit for a king. But beneath the glitter, it was still just Elvis, the same boy who had once stood nervously in front of a microphone, singing for the first time in a tiny Memphis studio. The crowds came in waves, filling arenas night after night, drawn by that voice, that presence, that magic that had never faded. And yet, for all the fame, there were moments when it felt like he was singing just for himself, in the quiet corners of Graceland, late at night when the guests had gone and the mansion was still. He would sit at the piano and play old gospel hymns, the songs of his childhood. Those were the moments when he seemed most at peace, when the weight of the world slipped away, and it was just him and the music, like it had been in the beginning. His final recordings carried that same intimacy, songs like Asterisk Hurt and Way Down Asterisk showed a voice that had lived, that knew sorrow and joy in equal measure. Even as his health wavered, his performances never lost their power. On June 21, 1977, in Rapid City, South Dakota, he gave one of his last concerts, pouring everything into the music as if he knew, somehow, that time was running short. The crowd that night heard something unforgettable, a man giving all of himself, one last time. When the news came on August 16, 1977, the world stood still. The king was gone, but the music, as it always does, remained. The records kept spinning, the radio kept playing his songs, and fans kept gathering at Graceland, leaving flowers and notes as if he were still there, just out of sight. His legacy wasn't just in the records he left behind, but in the way he had changed music forever, blending rock, gospel, blues, and country into something entirely new, something that belonged only to him. In the years that followed, new generations discovered his voice, his style, his story. Musicians from every genre cited him as an inspiration, a force that had shaped their own paths. His home, Graceland, became a place of pilgrimage, a museum filled with memories, his cars, his costumes, the handwritten lyrics scribbled in the margins of notebooks. visitors walked through the rooms slowly, as if they might catch a whisper of his laughter, the faint echo of a piano playing upstairs. And then there were the quiet ways his influence lingered, the way a young singer might unconsciously tilt their head the way he did, or the way an old song of his could bring a room to silence. Everyone caught in the spell of that voice. He had given the world so much, not just music, but a feeling, a kind of joy that couldn't be put into words. Even now, decades later, there are nights when the air feels different, when the past doesn't seem so far away. Maybe it's the crackle of an old record playing, or the way a certain chord rings out, or the sight of a gold lame suit behind glass. For a moment, it's like he's still here, still singing, still that boy from Mississippi who dreamed so big the whole world had to listen. So as you drift towards sleep tonight, let the music carry you. Imagine the soft strum of a guitar, the warm hum of a voice that never really left. The stars are out, the night is quiet, and somewhere beyond the silence, the songs still play. Good night. The gentle cadence of our story continues, flowing like a peaceful stream through the next chapter. Elvis Presley's legacy is like a river wide, deep, and forever flowing, carrying fragments of his spirit into the present. Even now, when the world hums with new sounds and rhythms, his influence lingers in the quietest ways. A singer might sway just a little like he did, or a guitarist might bend a note in that unmistakable way. And suddenly, for a fleeting moment, the king is there again. His music wasn't just notes and lyrics. It was a feeling, a vibration that settled into the bones of anyone who heard it. And though time has passed, that feeling has never truly faded. Think of all the voices that followed his, the ones who grew up with his records spinning in the background, their dreams shaped by the sound of his voice. Bruce Springsteen once said that hearing Elvis was like hearing a door open. Suddenly, everything was possible. John Lennon would later admit that without Elvis, there would have been no Beatles at all. And so the river widened, carrying his influence into new streams of rock and roll, pop, and beyond. But it wasn't just the musicians who followed him. The way Elvis moved those loose, effortless hips, the way he held a microphone like it was an extension of his body, changed performance forever. Michael Jackson studied him, absorbing the way he commanded a stage, blending it with his own magic to become the next great showman. Prince, too, took pieces of Elvis's theatricality, his daring, and made them entirely his own. Even modern performers, from Bruno Mars to Harry Styles, carry traces of that same charisma, that same understanding that a concert isn't just about singing. It's about giving people something unforgettable. And then there are the quieter ways he lingers. The way a young artist might cover one of his songs, not trying to mimic him, but letting his spirit guide them into something new. Chris Isaak's aching rendition of Can't Help Falling in Love, or Norah Jones's soft, jazzy take on Love Me Tender. These are not imitations, but conversations across time. Each artist brings their own heart to the music, yet the essence of Elvis remains, like a whisper beneath the notes. His influence stretches beyond music, too. Fashion designers still draw from his boldness, the rhinestone jumpsuits, the leather jackets, the slicked-back hair, all of it echoing in runways and streetwear decades later. The way he blurred lines, mixing country humility with rock and roll rebellion, opened doors for artists to defy categories, to be unapologetically themselves. Dolly Parton, Johnny Cash, even modern country stars like Casey Musgraves, all walk paths he helped pave, where authenticity matters more than fitting in, even in places he never could have imagined. His presence is felt. In Japan, Elvis isn't just a memory, he's a living culture. There are entire clubs dedicated to his music, where fans dress like him, move like him, keeping the spirit alive in ways that would have humbled him. In Germany, tribute artists perform in sold-out theaters, not as cheap imitations, but as loving homages to a man who transcended borders. Graceland, his beloved home, still draws pilgrims from every corner of the world, people who stand in his jungle room or walk the halls where he once laughed, all of them connected by something deeper than fandom, a shared love for what he gave the world. And then there are the moments no one plans, the ones that feel like gifts. A father teaching his daughter to dance to Jailhouse Rock in the living room. A couple choosing Can't Help Falling in Love as their wedding song, decades after it was first recorded. A lonely night where someone puts on Suspicious Minds. And suddenly, just for 3 minutes, they don't feel so alone. These are the quiet victories of his legacy, the way his music still stitches itself into the fabric of everyday life. Time hasn't dulled his impact. If anything, it's only grown richer, like a story told and retold, each generation finding something new in it. The tragedy of Elvis's later years wasn't that he lost his talent. It was that the world never let him be anything. But Elvis never allowed him to grow old gracefully, to evolve beyond the image that had been crafted for him. And what of the man behind the myth? The Elvis who existed when the cameras weren't rolling. Here, too, the stories have been flattened over time. He's often remembered either as the humble, generous Southern boy or the isolated, paranoid superstar, but rarely as both. The truth is, he was always a mix of contradictions. He could be incredibly kind, buying cars for strangers or quietly supporting charities, yet also painfully insecure, relying on an inner circle that often shielded him from reality. He loved the spotlight, but also longed for privacy. He was deeply spiritual, devouring books on religion and philosophy, yet also indulged in excess. These contradictions don't diminish him, they make him human. Perhaps the greatest misconception of all is that Elvis's story ended in 1977. The truth is, he never really left. His music still plays in diners and on oldie stations. his films still flicker on late-night TV. His image still looms large in pop culture. New generations discover him, not as a relic, but as something immediate, something alive. The real Elvis wasn't just the hip-shaking rebel or the sequined showman. He was the sum of all these things, and more. He was a man who loved his mother dearly, who missed his twin brother who died at birth, who fretted over whether he was doing enough with his fame, who laughed easily and cried just as quickly. So tonight, as the soft hum of a familiar melody drifts through the air, let yourself hear more than just the legend. Listen for the quiet moments, the unspoken complexities, the man behind the music. The story of Elvis Presley isn't a simple one. It's layered, textured, full of light and shadow. And that's what makes it worth returning to again and again. The night is deep now, the world hushed. Somewhere a record spins, a voice rises, and for just a moment, time seems to fold in on itself. The past isn't so far away after all. The music plays on, as it always will. Close your eyes and let it carry you. The king is still singing, still dreaming, still here. Good night. Now, as we continue our gentle journey through this remarkable life, let us explore the next chapter. Elvis Presley's life was like a river, sometimes roaring and unstoppable, other times slow and meandering, but always flowing towards something greater than himself. His journey began in the humble, sun-drenched streets of Tupelo, Mississippi, where a young boy with nothing but a guitar and a dream first felt the stirrings of something extraordinary. That dream carried him far beyond the boundaries of his small-town beginnings, across stages that shimmered under spotlights, into the homes of millions through radio waves and television screens, and finally into the very fabric of American culture. He didn't just sing songs. He gave voice to an entire generation's longing, rebellion, and joy. Even now, decades after his passing, his presence lingers not as a ghost, but as a living echo. Walk into any diner, any old record store, any grandparent's living room, and you'll hear him. His voice, rich and warm, still wraps around melodies like an embrace. Can't Help Falling in Love still slows the heartbeat of lovers. Hound Dog still makes feet tap, and Suspicious Minds still carries the ache of love on the edge. These songs aren't museum pieces. They breathe, they move. They feel as alive today as they did when they first filled the air. But Elvis was more than his music. He was a paradox, a shy boy who became the most confident performer in the world, a generous soul who struggled with the weight of his own fame, a man who could fill stadiums with his energy, yet often sought solitude in the quiet corners of Graceland. Critics might debate his place in history. Scholars might analyze his cultural significance. But the truest testament to Elvis Presley's legacy is simpler than all that. It's in the way people still smile when they hear his voice, the way a room still falls silent when Unchained Melody plays, the way, even now, someone somewhere is discovering him for the first time. feeling that same thrill Elvis once felt when he first heard gospel, blues, and country collide inside him. So tonight, as the world slows and the stars blink softly above, let yourself drift on that river of sound. Imagine the warm glow of a stage, the velvet rumble of a voice that changed everything. The songs are still here, waiting, as alive now as they ever were. And somewhere, in the quiet between the notes, Elvis is still singing, still dreaming, still reminding us that music doesn't just belong to the past. It's a living thing, breathing in time with all of us. Close your eyes. Let the melody carry you. The night is gentle, the air is sweet, and somewhere beyond the silence, the king is still on the radio, still on the turntable, still in the hearts of those who listen. Good night, wrapped in the comfort of these words. We'll drift together into the next part of this soothing biography. Elvis Presley's story is one of those rare tales that has been told so many times, in so many ways, that the truth and the myth have gently blurred together over the years, like an old photograph fading around the edges. Certain details soften, while others become sharper in our collective memory. And yet, beneath the well-worn anecdotes and the larger-than-life legend, there lies a far richer, more nuanced story, one that often gets lost in the retelling. One of the most persistent myths is that Elvis was simply a handsome young man who stumbled into fame by accident, a shy boy from Tupelo who just happened to have a voice that could shake the world. The truth, of course, is far more interesting. Elvis wasn't just lucky. He was deeply, relentlessly curious about music, absorbing everything from the gospel hymns of the black churches to the raw blues pouring out of Beale Street. He didn't just sing, he listened, he studied. He fused sounds together in ways no one had before. His rise wasn't an accident. It was the result of a young man who loved music so much that he couldn't help but reinvent it. Then there's the idea that Elvis stole black music, a simplification that ignores the deep, complicated relationship he had with the artists who inspired him. Yes, he took elements of rhythm and blues, of gospel, of soul, and made them his own. But so did every great musician who came before and after him. Music has always been a conversation, a borrowing and reshaping of sounds. Elvis never pretended otherwise. He spoke openly about his love for artists like Arthur Crudup, whose song, That's All Right, became his first single, or Sister Rosetta Tharpe, whose fiery gospel style echoed in his own performances. The real story isn't one of theft, but of reverence, of a white Southern boy who understood the power of black music and helped bring it to a wider audience, imperfectly, controversially, but undeniably. Another myth that lingers is the notion that Elvis's later years were nothing more than a sad decline, a tragic epilogue to his early glory. It's true that the jumpsuits, the Las Vegas residencies, the weight fluctuations, and the prescription drug use painted a picture of a man struggling under the weight of his own fame. But to reduce those years to mere downfall is to miss something important. Even in his final performances, there were flashes of that old magic. The voice, though weathered, could still soar, and the presence, though burdened, could still command a room. His 1973 Aloha from Hawaii special, broadcast to over 1 billion people, proved that his star power hadn't dimmed. He loved deeply his mother Gladys, his daughter Lisa Marie, his friends, his fans. He carried losses with him, too, the absence of his twin brother Jesse, the ache of failed relationships, the loneliness that sometimes crept in even when the crowds cheered loudest. His influence didn't stop with rock and roll. He blurred lines, broke barriers, and reshaped what it meant to be an artist. Before Elvis, music was divided race, genre, audience, all kept separate. But he took the soul of gospel, the grit of blues, the twang of country, and made something entirely new. He didn't just cross boundaries, he erased them. And in doing so, he paved the way for everyone who came after the Beatles, Bruce Springsteen, Prince, Beyoncé, artists who, in their own ways, owe a piece of their freedom to him. Even his fashion, his style, his very way of moving became part of the cultural language. The curled lip, the hip swivel, the bedazzled jumpsuits, these weren't just quirks, they were statements. He taught the world that music wasn't just something to hear, but something to see, to feel, to experience with the whole body. And then there was Graceland, the mansion that became his sanctuary, his kingdom, and in time, his final resting place. It stands today as a pilgrimage site for fans from every corner of the globe, a place where strangers become friends, united by the shared love of a man they never met, but somehow know. The walls, their hum with memory, gold records lining the halls, the jungle room's wild dacre, the quiet meditation garden where he now sleeps. Graceland isn't just a house, it's a living story, still being written by every visitor who walks its halls. Some say fame changes people, but perhaps it's more accurate to say fame reveals them. Elvis never lost the humility of his roots. He gave cars to strangers, paid off debts for friends, donated quietly to charities. He carried the manners of the South with him, always saying, "Yes, ma'am," and "No, sir." Always remembering the people who helped him along the way. Even at the height of his stardom, he remained, at heart, that boy from Tupelo who just wanted to sing. Time has a way of softening the edges of a legacy, of turning complicated lives into simple myths. But Elvis resists that. His story is too human, too real to be flattened into legend. He wasn't perfect. He made mistakes, faced struggles, carried burdens. But that's what makes him enduring. He wasn't a god on a stage. He was a man who knew what it was to dream, to rise, to fall, and to keep going anyway. And so tonight, as the world outside grows quieter, as the stars blink slowly above, his voice remains, a gentle constant in a changing world. Maybe it drifts from an old radio. Maybe it hums in the back of your mind. a half-remembered melody. However you hear it, let it remind you that great art never really fades. It simply finds new ears, new hearts, new moments to shine. Close your eyes now and imagine, just for a moment, a stage bathed in golden light. A figure steps forward, guitar in hand, and the first notes ring out. The crowd quiets. The music swells. And there he is, Elvis, forever young, forever alive in the songs he left behind. The night is soft around you, the air warm, the melody carrying you gently, effortlessly, towards sleep. So rest now, knowing that somewhere the music still plays. The king is still here, still singing, still part of the great, unending story of us all. Let his voice be the last thing you hear tonight, a lullaby for the dreamer in you. Good night and sweet dreams.